Hey everyone. Welcome back to Vision Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if the Umbrella Academy found Harry during time mission at age 5 and 5 helped him expose Dumbledore across every timeline? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Boy in the Cupboard. The temporal jump went wrong somewhere between 1987 and the void. 5 felt at the moment the green-black shimmer of the Commission's designated landing coordinates dissolved into something else, a sharp, nauseating pull that dragged him 3 degrees off-axis and spat him out into a concrete garden path in what his internal compass immediately identified as Surrey, England, sometime in the mid-1980s. He landed on one knee, the way he always did, like a comma dropped mid-sentence into the wrong paragraph. He straightened up, brushed gravel off his palm, and looked around. Privet Drive. Detached houses in a row so perfect they looked like a child's drawing of a neighborhood. Identical hedges, identical mailboxes, identical net curtains twitching in identical windows. The kind of street where nothing ever happened, which was usually the kind of street where something already had. 5 checked his internal chronometer. July 12, 1985. 11:43 p.m. He had been sent here, or rather, redirected here by forces his current equipment couldn't fully account for, to identify a temporal anomaly that the Commission's long-range scanners had flagged as a Class 3 irregularity. A fold in the timeline. Something that wasn't supposed to exist but did, radiating outward in concentric rings like a stone dropped in standing water. He had expected a paradox loop. Maybe a misplaced artifact. Once, memorably, it had been a cow that had somehow absorbed a time displacement field and kept appearing in the wrong century. He'd seen stranger. He hadn't expected this. The anomaly was coming from number 4. 5 stood at the end of the garden path and looked at the house. Ordinary. Aggressively ordinary. A Ford Cortina in the drive, a garden gnome by the rose bed, lights off in every window except one upstairs room. He could feel the temporal distortion from here, it pressed against his chest like barometric pressure before a storm, low and constant and threaded through with something he had no clinical term for. It felt almost like grief. He blinked inside. The house was dark and smelled of potpourri and clean carpets and something underneath both of those things that 5's hindbrain recognized before his conscious mind caught up, the smell of a place where someone had been frightened for a long time. He stood in the hallway for 3 seconds, running the math. Living room to his left, kitchen ahead, stairs on his right. The anomaly was below him and to the left, which meant, there was a door under the stairs. Small. Painted the same cream color as the rest of the hallway, with a latch on the outside. A bolt. Not decorative. Not incidental. A bolt on the outside of a door that was clearly not a storage cupboard, because storage cupboards didn't have handwriting on the inside of the door frame. 5 crouched, tilted his head, and read it in the thin light spilling from the street lamp through the frosted glass panel above the front door. Harry's room. In crayon, in the unsteady letters of a child who had only recently learned to write. Underlined twice, like it was something worth being proud of. He stood back up. His jaw was tight. He unlatched the bolt. The smell hit him first, small, enclosed space, unwashed, too warm, the particular staleness of not enough air, and then his eyes adjusted and he saw the boy curled on a cot that was barely wider than a shelf. 5 years old, maybe. Dark hair in every direction. Knees pulled to his chest. Sleeping in his clothes, which were at least 4 sizes too large and had a hole in one elbow. The child's right forearm was resting against the edge of the cot, and there was a bruise on it in the shape of fingers. The temporal anomaly was pulsing from him. It radiated off the boy in waves, that low terrible pressure, and 5 stood in the doorway of what was functionally a closet and looked at this child and felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. It was not sentiment. 5 didn't do sentiment. He did, however, do math. And the math said, this child is a fixed point in the timeline. The math said, someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to place this specific child in this specific location. The math said, No fixed point radiates like this unless the trajectory it's been locked into is wrong. The child opened his eyes. They were green. Startlingly, impossibly green, and behind a pair of cracked glasses that had been repaired with tape, and they blinked at 5 without fear, which was interesting, because most people, upon finding a teenage boy standing in the doorway of their cupboard at midnight, would express fear. This child just looked at him with the calm, flat assessment of someone who had learned very early that being afraid took too much energy. "You're not Uncle Vernon," the boy said. His voice was quiet. "Careful." "No," 5 said. "I'm not." "You're small." The boy sat up slowly, like he was checking each part of his body for soreness before committing to the movement. "For a grown-up." "I'm 13, 5 said, which was technically true in body if not in any other measurable sense. "Oh." The boy considered this. "What are you doing in my cupboard?" "I was about to ask you the same thing." 5 looked at the space, the single low-watt bulb, the spider in the corner, the crayon marks on the wall that might have been an attempt at a window. "Why are you in a cupboard?" The child's expression shifted into something careful and rehearsed. "Because I'm bad." 5 looked at the bruise on the boy's arm. He looked at the bolt on the outside of the door. He looked at the cot with its single thin blanket folded with the precision of a child who had been told, very clearly, how things were to be kept. "Who told you that?" 5 said. "Uncle Vernon. Aunt Petunia." A pause. "Dudley. And you believe them?" The boy tilted his head. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. He had the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had stopped asking whether things were true and started just cataloging what was. 5 recognized it. He had worn it himself, at 13, in the apocalypse. The specific vacancy of a person who has survived by processing rather than feeling. "What's your name?" 5 asked. "Harry." Another careful pause. "Harry Potter." 5 filed that away. "Harry Potter." "I'm 5. Harry looked at him. "That's not a name." "No," 5 agreed, "it isn't." "Does that bother you?" Harry seemed to consider this seriously. "No," he said finally. "I don't think names are that important." He looked down at his hands. "I had a name. They just call me, Boy." Something cold moved through 5's chest. Not emotion, 5 didn't trade in emotion, hadn't for decades, but something that functioned like it. A recognition of a pattern. He had grown up in a house where Reginald Hargreeves had looked at his children and seen assets before people. He knew the specific shape of that damage, the way it hollowed you out in places that were supposed to be full. "Harry," 5 said, "how long have you been in this cupboard?" "Always," Harry said simply. 5 made a decision. He made it the way he made most decisions, fast, certain, completely without consultation, and he stepped back from the doorway and said, "Get up. Bring whatever matters to you." Harry blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Get up. Get whatever you want to take. You have about 3 minutes before I leave, with or without you." He paused. "I'd prefer with." The boy stared at him for a moment, and then, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been ready to run for a very long time without knowing it, he reached under the cot and pulled out a biscuit tin. Inside it, 5 caught a glimpse of a photograph, a smooth pebble, and a small figure made out of twisted wire that might have been a dog. Harry tucked it under his arm, pushed his cracked glasses up his nose, and looked up at 5. "Okay," Harry said. As if leaving in the middle of the night with a stranger who called himself a number was perfectly reasonable. As if anything was better than staying. "Good." 5 turned toward the hallway. "Stay close. Don't touch anything." "Where are we going?" Harry asked, following him on silent feet that suggested a great deal of practice at moving without being heard. 5 looked back at him. "Somewhere better than this." He reached out, took the boy's thin wrist, not the bruised one, he noted, choosing the other, and blinked them both into the dark. The Commission safe house in Brussels was not designed for children. It was designed for 5, which is to say it was functional, stripped of anything decorative, stocked with coffee and scotch and a whiteboard covered in equations, and entirely devoid of anything resembling warmth. Harry stood in the middle of it in his enormous clothes and his cracked glasses and looked around with the patient, systematic attention of someone conducting a survey. "It's very tidy," Harry said. "Yes. And cold. The heating is on." 5 went to the kitchen, because coffee was necessary after what had just happened and also because he needed to not look at the child for a moment while he thought. "Are you hungry?" Silence. Then, very quietly, "Yes." 5 opened the cupboard and looked at what he had, which was not much, and found a tin of condensed soup and some bread that was 3 days old but still structurally sound. He put it all on the hob without ceremony, and when he turned around Harry had climbed onto one of the high stools at the kitchen counter and was watching him with those unblinking green eyes. "You know," 5 said, because silence made him think and thinking made him aware of exactly how impulsive he had just been, "I didn't plan this." "Oh," Harry said. "Is that bad?" "I haven't decided yet." 5 poured coffee for himself. "Are you going to ask me where we are?" "Brussels," Harry said. 5 stopped. "How do you know that?" "The clock on the wall. It says the right time for here." Harry pointed at it. "And there was a sticker on the door when we came in. The writing was French but there was a picture of the atomium. We learned about the atomium in school." He paused. "I'm not allowed to be better at things than Dudley at school. But sometimes I remember things anyway." 5 looked at him for a long moment. "How old are you?" 5. Harry looked up at him. "Same as your name." "Mm." 5 turned back to the soup. "You're perceptive. Is that good?" "Exceedingly," 5 said, without turning around, and he heard something happen in the quality of Harry's silence, a small, fractional shift, the particular quiet of someone receiving a word they didn't know they'd been waiting for. He stirred the soup and did not examine that too closely. He made a call at 2 in the morning, which he felt was reasonable given the circumstances, except that Diego answered on the second ring with a knife embedding itself in a wall somewhere nearby, which suggested Diego had not been sleeping either. 5. Diego's voice was rough and slightly breathless. "What the hell? It's 2 in the a.m. I need you to tell Luther I'm extending my commission assignment," 5 said. "I've encountered a complication." "What kind of complication?" 5 glanced at Harry, who was eating his soup with methodical concentration, both hands wrapped around the bowl like he expected someone to take it. "A small one. Approximately 1 meter tall. I'll explain later." 5. "What did you?" I said. "I'll explain later." He paused. "Is everyone alive?" "Define alive." "Biologically functional and not hospitalized." "Yeah, mostly. Klaus is technically in a K-hole but he does that." A shuffling sound. "Are you okay?" 5 considered the question. "I found something on this mission I wasn't expecting." "What, like a paradox?" "An artifact." "A child," 5 said, "in a cupboard. In Surrey." The silence from Diego's end was very loud. 5. "I left the door unbolted," 5 said, "in case that changes your read on the situation." You took a child." "I removed a child from a situation that was, conservatively, a Class 2 humanitarian emergency and also functionally illegal under approximately 12 separate pieces of international legislation, yes." He paused. "His name is Harry." He knew what city he was in from a sticker on a door and the position of a clock. "He's 5 years old." A beat. "He reminded me of me." Another silence. Then Diego said, quietly, "Okay. I'll be back in 48 hours. I have to run some scans first." "The temporal irregularity that brought me there came from him, Diego." He's a fixed point. Someone put him there deliberately. I need to know who. Okay, Diego said again, differently. Be careful. Both of you. 5 hung up. Harry had finished his soup and was now sitting very still, watching 5 with that flat, careful attention. Was that your brother? He asked. One of them. I have 5. Harry processed this. I don't have any brothers. He paused. Just Dudley. But he's not really a brother. He hits me. Cousins don't count, 5 said, which was not perhaps the most emotionally sophisticated response, but it was what he had. Do you have sisters? 2. Allison and Vanya. 5 sat down across from him with his coffee. They're going to want to meet you. Why? Because I'm bringing you back with me. 5 had already decided this, he was simply informing the relevant parties now. Unless you'd rather go back to the cupboard. Harry looked at him steadily over the rim of his empty bowl. No, he said. Good. 5 opened his notebook. Tell me everything you remember about the people who left you there. Everything. What they said, what they did, how long it's been. Harry began to talk, and his voice was quiet and factual and almost entirely without inflection, and 5 wrote every word down in his small, precise handwriting and did not let his expression change even when the things Harry described made him want to do something that would constitute a breach of commission protocol and also probably several laws. He was very good at not letting his expression change. He had been doing it since he was, roughly, Harry's age. The academy was loud on a Tuesday morning. 5 had been gone for 6 days, which was not unusual, but he had called from Brussels, which was, and he had said don't make a scene when he arrived, which meant he had told them almost nothing, which meant every single one of his siblings was waiting in the entrance hall when he opened the front door and stepped inside. Harry stepped in behind him. The entrance hall of the Umbrella Academy was, in many respects, an overwhelming thing to encounter for the first time. It was tall and marble and faintly Gothic, with Reginald's collection of oddities in cases along the walls, animal skulls and antique armaments and 3 things that didn't have names yet. It smelled of old books and whatever Pogo had been cooking in something faintly electrical that came from the training rooms below. Harry stopped just inside the doorway and looked up. Luther was at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, 6 feet something and built like a question about structural load-bearing walls. Diego was leaning in the doorway to the kitchen, one hand in his pocket, the other very deliberately nowhere near a knife. Allison stood by the parlor door, beautiful and watchful. Klaus was draped across the banister in what appeared to be a feather boa over a robe, one hand raised in greeting like a benediction. Vanya stood nearest to the door, small and quiet and looking at Harry with an expression that was completely unguarded in a way that her expressions rarely were. Harry looked at all of them in turn. Then he looked back at 5. This, 5 said, is the Umbrella Academy. They are, from left to right and approximately in order of usefulness in a crisis, Vanya, Allison, Diego, Klaus, and Luther. He paused. They're going to stare at you for a moment because that's what they do, and then they're going to ask you questions, and then if you're lucky someone will feed you something that isn't condensed soup. I have questions right now, actually, Luther said, from the stairs. You can have them in a minute, 5 said. Vanya was the one who moved. She crossed the hallway in 4 steps and crouched down in front of Harry, not towering over him, not making herself big, just leveling herself to his eye line, and said, very simply, "Hi." Harry looked at her. "Hi. I'm Vanya. I play the violin." She said it like it was a credential, which in this house it was. "You must be Harry." "Yes," Harry said. "Are you hungry?" "I was making breakfast." Harry's entire body shifted, something releasing in his shoulders that 5 hadn't been able to account for in Brussels. "Yes please," Harry said, with a politeness so carefully maintained it made the asking harder to hear than the answer. Vanya stood up and held out her hand. Harry looked at it for half a second, assessing, 5 knew, the way he'd learned to assess everything, checking for traps, and then took it, and Vanya led him toward the kitchen without ceremony, and the two of them disappeared around the corner, and 5 was left in the hallway with the rest of them. Luther came down the stairs. 5. I know what you're going to say. Do you? Because what I'm going to say is that you found a child in England and instead of calling child services you time-jumped him to Belgium and then brought him here, and I feel like there are several steps missing in that process. Child services, 5 said, would return him to the people who bolted him in a cupboard, because in 1985 the evidentiary standards for removal were, I don't care about the evidentiary standards, you should, because they're directly relevant to why I made the call I made. 5 poured himself a coffee from the pot on the sideboard, because there was one there and he needed it. The child is a temporal anomaly, Luther. He's a fixed point. Someone engineered his placement in that house. I don't know who yet, and I don't know why, but until I do, he is safer here than anywhere else I can think of. The hall was quiet. Diego uncrossed his arms. How bad was the cupboard? Bad enough, 5 said, which for 5 was the equivalent of a doctoral thesis on the subject. Allison looked toward the kitchen, from which the quiet sound of Vanya talking and the smell of eggs had begun to drift. How old? 5. Possibly just turned 5. Klaus descended the stairs in a slow, theatrical spiral, boa trailing. He's got the most incredible aura, he said, in a tone that was almost reverential under the performance. I've never seen anything like it. It's like a whole conversation in colors I don't have names for. Klaus, 5 said. I'm just saying. Whatever that child is, he's extraordinary. Klaus stopped at the bottom of the stairs. His eyes, beneath the theater, were serious. And he's very frightened. He's just very good at not showing it. I know, 5 said. Like someone else I could name. Klaus. I'm done. Klaus swept toward the kitchen. I'm going to make him tea. He's 5, he doesn't drink tea, hot chocolate then. Don't hover. And Klaus was gone. Luther sat down on the stairs, forearms on his knees. So what do we do? We figure out who put him there, 5 said. And we make sure he doesn't go back. Dad will, Reginald, 5 said, with precision, will adapt. He picked up his coffee. He always does. The thing about Harry was that he was quiet in a way that was different from shy. He watched. He catalogued. He filed things with the efficiency of someone who had learned very young that information was the only resource he was reliably allowed to keep. He watched Diego throw knives at the target board in the training room and then came back the next day and asked, in his careful voice, if he could watch again. He sat in the parlor while Allison read glossy magazines and listened to her talk about the photographs with an attention that Allison found first flattering and then moving, because he wasn't listening to the content, he was listening to the sound. The sound of someone talking to him like he was worth talking to. He followed Vanya everywhere. There was no other word for it. He shadowed her at a polite distance, as if she were the sun and he was simply orienting himself. Vanya, for her part, did not seem to mind. She talked to him while she practiced, explaining the music in the simple, honest vocabulary of someone who understood it before she understood how to explain it, and Harry listened with his whole body, eyes slightly unfocused in the way that meant he was processing something deeper than the surface of things. He asked Klaus once if he could see the dead people. Klaus, to his credit, did not make a joke. He sat down cross-legged on the floor in the hallway, boa around his shoulders, and said, sometimes. They're usually not very interesting. Why, is there someone you want to talk to? Harry thought about it. My mum and dad, he said. They're dead. Klaus was very still for a moment. Do you know who they were? No, Harry said. Uncle Vernon says they were drunk drivers. A pause. But I don't think he tells the truth about things. That sounds right, Klaus said, slowly. About Vernon, I mean. He hesitated. I haven't met your mom or dad. But if they're around, if they're on my frequency, I'd tell them you were asking. Harry looked at him with those green eyes. Thank you, he said, with the grave courtesy of someone who knew exactly what a gift was because he'd been given so few of them. Klaus turned away and blinked very deliberately at the wall for a moment. Five watched all of this from varying distances, which was his way. He ran the temporal scans on Harry every morning, subtle, non-invasive, nothing that would distress a 5-year-old, and every morning the data added another layer to the pattern he was building. The fixed point designation was stronger than anything he'd seen outside of catastrophic events. The engineering was precise and complex and old, which meant whoever had done it had access to either temporal technology or something functionally equivalent, and had been planning for longer than Harry had been alive. He was 3 weeks into the analysis when Reginald Hargreeves came home. Harry was at the kitchen table with a book, an actual book, not a children's picture book, something about constellations that Vanya had found in the library because Harry had asked what the bright star was outside the window and then not stopped asking, when the front door opened and the familiar tap of the cane came down the hallway. Five was already in the kitchen. He stood up without theatrics. Reginald stopped in the doorway. He looked at Harry, who looked back at him with the measuring calm that was becoming Harry's most recognizable feature. Then Reginald looked at Five. Explain, Reginald said. Temporal anomaly, Class 3, July 12, 1985, Surrey, Five said. The irregularity was child-generated. I extracted him from an abusive domicile and brought him here pending investigation. The child's temporal signature suggests deliberate engineering by an unknown party using either temporal technology or equivalent magical ability. He paused. He's also been starved and physically abused for the majority of his life, if that's relevant. Reginald looked at Harry again. Harry had not looked away during any of this. He was still looking at Reginald with the patient, unafraid attention of someone who had met his monsters already and found them scaled to fit a cupboard under some stairs. What is your name? Reginald said. Harry, Harry said. Harry Potter. Reginald made the smallest of sounds. Something that might have been recognition, on a face that did almost nothing. He looked at Five. You know that name, Five said immediately. I know of it, Reginald said, in the specific tone he used when he was choosing his words with the care of a man defusing something. Then you know what I'm investigating. What I know, Reginald said, setting his cane against the counter and moving to pour himself a glass of water with the slow precision of a much older man, is that certain parties in certain communities have significant interest in the boy's fate. And that those parties are not accustomed to their arrangements being disrupted. Five stared at him. You're going to tell me everything you know. In time, Reginald said. Now, Five said. Harry turned a page of his constellation book. Reginald looked at him again, that strange, fractional softening that he only ever showed when confronted with something genuinely unexpected. What are you reading? He asked Harry. Harry held up the book. About stars. Did you know that Sirius is actually 2 stars? Sirius A and Sirius B. But we can only see one. He paused. I think that's interesting. Something real that's hidden. Reginald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, to Five, I'll tell you what I know. Tonight. Five nodded. He looked at Harry, who had gone back to his book, one finger tracing the diagram of the binary system with patient curiosity. Something real that's hidden, Five thought. 5 years old and already pulling threads. He sat back down across from the boy and opened his own notebook, and they sat there in the kitchen together, 2 people of the same bent mind in very different sizes, reading in the afternoon light while the rest of the academy moved around them. The temporal scans could wait an hour. The next month moved the way months do with a child in a house that wasn't designed for them, in jolts and adjustments, the whole space recalibrating itself around something small and unexpected and increasingly impossible to imagine not being there. Diego found Harry sitting outside his door at 6 in the morning on a Thursday, waiting, because Harry had heard him getting up at that time every day and had correctly deduced this was training time and wanted to watch. Diego looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You can watch from the doorway. Don't touch the knives." Harry sat in the doorway in his enormous pajamas and watched Diego throw 7 knives in sequence at a target 6 meters away, all of them within a half-inch of center, and did not say a single word. When Diego finished, Harry said, "You adjust for the weight differently on the last 2. The ones with the wrapped handles." Diego turned around and stared at him. "You're 5, Diego said. "Yeah," Harry said, "but I noticed." Diego started letting him come to training sessions after that. Allison took him to the mall, which was perhaps the most complicated gift she could have given him, the noise, the people, the overwhelming abundance of things, and Harry moved through it with the wide, careful eyes of someone seeing ordinary life from the outside for the first time. He didn't ask for anything until Allison said, "Pick something, anything you want, it's yours," and Harry stood in the bookshop for 10 minutes before choosing a battered paperback about navigation by the stars, which cost $2.50, which was the cheapest thing in the shop, and Allison bought it and then took him back in and bought him 7 other things without asking because she had recognized the price checking and it had broken something in her chest that would take a while to put back together. Klaus taught him to play poker, which was not perhaps an appropriate lesson for a 5-year-old, but Harry turned out to have such an impeccable poker face that Klaus immediately declared him a prodigy and the lessons continued. Vanya taught him a C chord on the violin, which hurt his fingers and produced a sound like a cat making a formal complaint, and Harry laughed, the first real, unguarded laugh 5 had heard from him, surprised out of him like something that hadn't been allowed out before, and Vanya laughed too, and the sound of it went through the house and did something to the air. Luther made him a bed out of the things he had identified Harry looking at, the kind of bed with rails so you couldn't fall out, the kind that communicated "This is yours, it will be here tomorrow," and set it up in a room on the 4th floor that caught the morning light and had a window that faced the garden, and said nothing about it except to knock on Harry's door that evening and say, "The room's yours if you want it. You don't have to decide now." Harry moved in before Luther had reached the end of the hallway. 5 watched all of this and ran his scans and built his timeline and said nothing that was not tactical. But 3 weeks in, at 2 in the morning, Harry appeared in the doorway of 5's office. He was in his pajamas, real ones now, that fit, that Allison had bought, and his cracked glasses, and he stood in the doorway and said, "I had a bad dream." 5 didn't look up from his notes. "About?" "The cupboard," Harry said. "I dreamed I was still there." 5 was quiet for a moment. "You're not." "I know. But in the dream I didn't know that." Harry came into the office and looked at the whiteboard covered in 5's equations and diagrams. He stood there for a while. "What's all this?" "The investigation. About you." Harry looked at it steadily. The equations, the timeline markers, the web of connections 5 was building. "Is it bad?" he asked. "What you're finding?" 5 set down his pen. He looked at Harry, 5 years old, glasses, pajamas, standing in an office at 2 in the morning because he'd had a nightmare, looking at a whiteboard full of evidence that someone had designed his suffering, and said, "Yes." Harry nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. Not "it's fine," not "don't worry about it," but "okay," acknowledgement, storage, filing. "But I'm going to find out who," 5 said. "And what I find, I will tell you." Harry looked at him. "You promise?" 5 held his gaze. "I don't make promises," he said. "But I mean this one." Harry seemed to accept this distinction, which told 5 he was already learning how 5 operated. He looked at the whiteboard a moment longer, tracing the pattern with his eyes, and 5 watched him do it, and saw the moment something connected, some thread of it becoming clear in the way the boy's expression shifted from observation to comprehension. "Someone planned it," Harry said. "All of it. Someone put me in that cupboard on purpose." "Yes," 5 said. "Why?" "That," 5 said, picking up his pen again, "is what I'm going to find out." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to help." "You're 5. You said I was perceptive." The word delivered back with exact precision, like something counted and saved. 5 looked at him across the desk. 5 Hargreeves, who had been alone in an apocalypse for 45 years, who had eaten cold beans in the ruins of civilization and built temporal equations in the margins of Dostoevsky and never, not once, let anyone close enough to need, looked at this 5-year-old who had his own name and said, "I want to help," like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You can observe," 5 said. "For now. You can observe and ask questions and tell me what you notice." "You notice things." "Yes," Harry said. "So do I." Harry almost smiled. It wasn't quite there yet, the full smile, the unguarded one, but it was the shape of one, the approaching weather front of one. "Okay," he said. "I'll go back to bed." "The dream won't come back tonight," 5 said. He did not know this for certain. But he said it with the same certainty he applied to temporal mathematics, because some things needed to be stated as fact before they could become it. Harry went back to bed. 5 turned back to his notes, and added a new column to the timeline, and labeled it, HP, what he notices. He started filling it in immediately. Outside, the academy was quiet, and in the room on the 4th floor with the window facing the garden, a 5-year-old boy who had been told his whole life that he was nothing fell asleep in a bed that had been built for him, in a house full of impossible people, and did not dream of cupboards. He dreamed of stars. Chapter 2, What the Stars Owe You. The first time Harry made something happen, he was 6 years old and Diego was bleeding. It wasn't serious. Diego's definition of not serious covered a range of injuries that would have hospitalized most people, and a knife graze across the back of his forearm barely registered on his personal scale of catastrophe. He'd come into the kitchen after a commission mission gone sideways, jacket sleeve rolled up, pressing a dish towel to the cut with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this many times. Harry was at the table with his navigation book and a bowl of cereal, and he looked up, and his eyes went to the cut, and something in his face went very still and very focused. Diego noticed. "It's fine," he said. "Don't." The air in the kitchen changed. Not dramatically, no thunderclap, no visible light. Just a shift in pressure, like the moment before a storm decides what it's going to be. The dish towel lifted slightly at one corner. The cereal in Harry's bowl moved in a slow, deliberate circle. And the cut on Diego's arm, the one that was 2 inches long and bleeding steadily, closed. Not all at once. Gradually, the way time-lapse footage of a flower works, everything moving in the direction it was supposed to go, just faster. Diego stared at his arm. Then he looked at Harry. Harry was staring at his own hands. His expression was the one 5 had catalogued under processing something unexpected, not frightened, not triumphant, just running calculations that his vocabulary wasn't quite equipped for yet. "Did you do that?" Diego asked. "I think so," Harry said. He turned his hands over. "It felt like pushing. But with something I don't have a word for." Diego sat down across from him slowly, the dish towel still in his hand. "Has this happened before?" Harry considered. "Sometimes things move when I'm upset. And once there was a really high shelf and I needed something from it and then I was on the shelf." He paused. "I don't know how I got on the shelf." Diego processed this. "Does 5 know?" "I haven't told him yet." "Why not?" Harry picked up his spoon and stirred his cereal. "I wasn't sure if it was real. Or if it would go away." He looked up. "Or if it would make me have to go back." Diego held his gaze. "Nothing," he said, with the flat, iron certainty that was his most natural register, "is sending you back." Harry looked at him steadily. Something in his expression did the thing it did sometimes, the thing that was not quite crying but was adjacent to it, the thing that existed in the space between a feeling and its expression. Then he nodded, and went back to his cereal, and said, "Okay. I'll tell 5. "Tell me what?" 5 said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his coffee and his notebook in the manner of someone who existed slightly outside normal spatial logic even when he wasn't jumping. Diego pointed at Harry. Harry told him. 5 sat down, put his notebook on the table, and said, "Show me." Harry looked at the notebook. His brow furrowed slightly, that small focused crease between the eyes that was becoming as familiar as his hair, which was becoming more spectacular by the month. The notebook slid 3 inches to the left. 5 watched it. Then he looked at Harry. Something moved in his expression, not surprise, because 5 had metabolized his capacity for surprise somewhere around the 14th apocalypse, but something sharper and more interested than his usual affect. Like a compass finding north. "Again," he said. The notebook slid back. Further. It lifted off the table entirely, hung in the air at about Harry's eye level, and rotated once, slowly, like a planet finding its axis. "Put it down." It came down without a sound. 5 picked up his coffee. "Interesting," he said, which from 5 was a significant statement. Harry looked at him. "Is it bad?" "It's extraordinary," 5 said. "The temporal scans have been showing energy discharge I couldn't account for. Now I can." He opened the notebook, clicked his pen, and started writing. "It's not telekinesis, the energy signature is different. It's closer to probability manipulation at the immediate physical level. You're not moving things so much as deciding what they do next." He looked up. "Your instinct is to use it when someone is hurt. That's interesting too. It's not just force. It's care." Harry blinked at the word. "Sentiment," Diego said dryly, from 5. "Observation," 5 said. "There's a difference." But he didn't say it as sharply as he might have. Over the next year, Harry's power expanded the way a language expands when you finally have people to speak it with, in bursts and consolidations, new words arriving in clusters after long plateau stretches. He didn't just move things. He fixed things. A broken drawer in Vanya's room that had been stuck for 2 years became unstuck the morning after Harry noticed it. A cracked window in the training room sealed itself overnight. Klaus found his lost harmonica on the kitchen table one morning with a note, found it behind the radiator. Klaus had never mentioned the harmonica to Harry. Harry had simply known it was missing. The thing was, and this was what interested 5, who was now maintaining a parallel research track alongside his Dumbledore investigation, Harry's power wasn't random and it wasn't consistent in the way a defined superpower was consistent. It was responsive. It seemed to operate on something like instinct and something like empathy, triggered by need rather than will, refined by attention rather than practice. When Harry was calm and focused, it was precise. When he was distressed, it expanded outward in waves that affected the whole room. When he was asleep and dreaming well, small lights appeared near the ceiling, soft and warm, like fireflies made of something better than biology. "He's not like us," Vanya said to 5, one evening when Harry had fallen asleep on the sofa with his star book and the room had gone gentle around him in the particular way it did. "No," 5 agreed. "His power isn't, ours came from outside. Dad always said that. Granted. His is from inside. It's part of him the way breathing is." She looked at the soft lights near the ceiling. "It's like he is magic. Not that he does it." "Yes," 5 said. "That means the people who put him in that cupboard knew what he was." "Yes. And they wanted to, what? Suppress it? Starve it out of him?" "Not suppress it," 5 said. He pulled out his notebook, flipped to the current working theory. "I've been going through Commission historical records. In the magical community, and yes, Vanya, that is a real thing that exists. I'm sorry no one told you sooner, I'll explain later. In the magical community, there was a war. It ended approximately 4 years before I found Harry. A dark wizard, significant body count, essentially their version of an apocalypse." He paused. "Harry ended it. At 18 months old. On the night his parents were killed." Vanya stared at him. "The theory in that community is that Harry reflected a killing curse back at the caster and destroyed him. The curse left a scar. Five touched his own forehead, the rough location. It also apparently left something else. Something in Harry that is connected to what's left of the Dark Wizard's power. His jaw tightened. What I believe, what the scans suggest, is that Harry was placed with the Dursleys not just as a protective measure but as a conditioning measure. The plan was to keep him small. Diminished. Grateful. A weapon that pointed in a specific direction and didn't ask questions about whose hand was on the grip. Vanya was very still. She looked at Harry, asleep on the sofa. 6 years old, glasses, hair like a weather event, lights floating in the air above him like he was generating his own constellation. Who? She said. I have a name, Five said. I'm building the evidence. He closed the notebook. His name is Albus Dumbledore. He is the headmaster of the school Harry is meant to attend. He is considered the greatest wizard alive. He has been described, in every historical record I can access, as a fundamentally good man. Five's voice was very flat. Which is exactly what you'd expect someone to say about a man who is very good at looking like one. Vanya looked at him. You're sure? I'm not sure yet. That's why I'm still building the evidence. He stood up. But I will be. He glanced at Harry one more time before leaving the room. The light stayed near the ceiling for another hour after Five left. Warm and soft and constant. When Harry was 7, Reginald told him the truth. Five hadn't planned it this way, he'd been managing the information carefully, building toward a moment when Harry was old enough to process it with the full context it deserved. But Reginald Hargreeves had never been particularly interested in other people's timelines, and he called Harry into his study one Thursday afternoon with the same tone he used for everything, which was the tone of someone who had decided something would happen and was now informing the relevant furniture. Five found out because Klaus heard it through the wall and immediately came to find him. He's telling him, Klaus said, slightly breathless. About the magical world. About his parents. All of it. Five was already moving. He got to the study doorway as Reginald was saying, in his precise, unadorned way, your parents were James and Lily Potter. They were killed by a dark wizard named Voldemort on the 31st of October, 1981. You survived. The manner of your survival destroyed Voldemort, temporarily. You were subsequently placed with your maternal aunt by a man named Albus Dumbledore, who believed that your presence in that household would fulfill a protective enchantment tied to your mother's sacrifice. A pause. He was not wrong about the enchantment. He was wrong about everything else. Harry sat in the large chair across from Reginald's desk with his feet not quite reaching the floor and his hands folded in his lap and his face doing the thing, the flat, filing thing. He was listening. He was taking every word and putting it somewhere internal and precise. He didn't cry. 7 years old, hearing his parents were murdered, hearing that his entire existence had been engineered, and he didn't cry. Five stood in the doorway and felt something heavy move through him that he didn't name. My parents, Harry said. Were they good people? Reginald was quiet for a moment. It was a different quiet from his usual one. From everything I can ascertain, he said, yes. Your mother in particular was considered extraordinarily gifted. Your father was brave and somewhat reckless. The smallest pause. I am told they loved you very much. Harry absorbed this. How do you know about all this? About the magical world? I have been aware of its existence for some time, Reginald said, which was an answer that contained a great deal more than it released. I have contacts. What happened to Voldemort? Harry said the name without flinching, because no one had told him to be afraid of it yet. He survived in a diminished form. He will return eventually. This is, in fact, the mechanism by which Dumbledore's plan operates. He needs you frightened, isolated, and emotionally dependent on his guidance before that return occurs, because he intends to use you as the instrument of Voldemort's final destruction. Harry was quiet for a moment. Like a weapon, he said. Yes, Reginald said. 5 already told me that part, Harry said. Not all of it. But that someone wanted to use me. Reginald looked at 5 in the doorway. 5 looked back. Some kind of information passed between them, mutual acknowledgement of the fact that this child was not going to be protected by being kept in the dark, and both of them, in their separate and completely opposite ways, had known this from the beginning. 5 is building a case, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Reginald said. I want to help, Harry said. Again. The same words he'd said at 5 in the office doorway, but different now, fuller, more specific, less the statement of a child reaching for inclusion and more the statement of someone who had already decided. Reginald looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something that 5 had never, in his considerable experience, heard Reginald Hargreeves say to any of his children. All right, Reginald said. 5 incorporated Harry into the investigation the way he incorporated everything, methodically, with clear parameters and escalating responsibility. At 7, Harry's job was simple: read everything 5 gave him and ask questions. He was a remarkably good reader, better than his age should have produced, though 5 suspected this was partly the magic, which seemed to have a particular affinity for information the same way it had an affinity for need. Harry read commission historical files and magical community historical records and 5's own analysis notes with the same focused attention he gave to his star book, and he asked very good questions, and occasionally he said things that reframed 5's analysis in ways that took 5 a moment to process. Dumbledore didn't do this to be cruel, Harry said one evening, age 7.5, cross-legged on 5's office floor with a file folder in his lap. Did he? No, 5 said. He did it because he thought it would work. Because he thought the thing that needed doing was important enough to cost whatever it cost. Harry looked at the folder. He was going to spend me, he said, with the precise vocabulary of a child who had been listening to 5 talk about resources and calculations for 2 years. Like currency. 5 put down his pen. Yes. That's worse than if he just didn't care, Harry said. If he didn't care, it would just be cruelty. This is, he stopped, looking for the word. This is someone who looked at me and decided I was worth less than what I could be used for. And thought that was reasonable. Yes, 5 said. Harry closed the folder. When we expose him, he said, I want people to understand that part specifically. Not just what he did. But that he thought it was okay to do it. 5 looked at him. 7 years old. Feet not quite reaching the floor. The most precise moral intelligence 5 had encountered in anyone of any age. That, 5 said, is exactly what the evidence will show. The siblings each noticed the change differently. Diego noticed it first in the training room, when Harry at 7.5 began anticipating the sequence of his throws before he made them, not by watching his shoulder but by watching his eyes. Diego didn't say anything. He just started adjusting his sequence, randomizing it, and Harry kept pace for another week before Diego finally stopped mid-session and said, How are you doing that? And Harry said, You look at what you're aiming for about a quarter second before you move. Your eyes go first. Diego stared at him. I know, Harry said, I can't help noticing things. Diego started teaching him properly after that, not knife throwing, he wasn't there yet, but movement, balance, the spatial awareness that underpinned everything Diego did physically. Allison noticed it when Harry started managing social situations with a subtlety that shouldn't have been available to a 7-year-old. There was a dinner party at the academy, Reginald's business contacts, the kind of gathering that required everyone to be present and presentable, and Harry moved through it like water, talking to people in ways that left them feeling seen and slightly charmed, deflecting questions about his own situation with the ease of someone who had learned very young to be unreadable when it counted. Afterward, Allison found him in the kitchen eating cake and asked, How did you do that? And Harry said, You always watch where people look when they're talking to someone else. If they look away more than twice, the conversation is already over for them. I just made sure everyone I talked to was still looking. Allison sat down and said, Okay, kid, I'm going to teach you everything I know, and Harry said, good. Klaus noticed it in a way that was more complicated and more Klaus-specific, which was to say he noticed it through the dead. His ability to communicate with the deceased had improved in Harry's presence, or rather, Harry's presence had an effect on the membrane between Klaus's world and the ordinary one, making it more permeable, better lit. Ghosts that Klaus usually only caught fragments of came through clear and steady in Harry's vicinity, and one afternoon Klaus was sitting with Harry in the garden when a woman appeared, not a ghost exactly, more like the memory of one, with red hair and green eyes, and she looked at Harry for a long moment with an expression that Klaus would not have been able to describe to anyone who hadn't loved something they were losing, and she said, very quietly, he's doing well. Tell him I said he's doing well. Klaus told him. Harry sat very still in the garden for a long time after that, and the lights that appeared around him then were different from the usual ones, warmer, deeper, something almost gold in them, and Klaus put his arm around Harry's small shoulders and they sat there together in the afternoon sun while Harry processed the idea that his mother could see him, and was proud. Luther noticed it practically and without ceremony, which was Luther's way. He came home from a commission mission with a dislocated shoulder and Harry met him in the hallway, took one look at his shoulder, and said, that needs to go back in. It's going to swell if you wait. Luther said, I know, I'm going to find, and Harry reached up, placed his hands on Luther's shoulder with a precision that had no business being in a 7-year-old's hands, and with the focused attention that preceded his magic doing something intentional, set the shoulder back with a single smooth movement that hurt about a third as much as it was supposed to. Luther said, how did you? And Harry said, I've been reading anatomy. And the magic knows what's wrong. It just needs me to aim it. Luther looked at him, this small person who came up to his elbow, and felt something that was difficult to put in words, something about what it was to have had a father who treated you as a resource and to now be watching someone else get told their whole life that they were a resource, and to be standing here while that someone else fixed your shoulder at age 7 with hands that knew what they were doing because he'd studied. He put his uninjured hand on Harry's head, briefly. Thanks, kid, he said. Harry pushed his glasses up his nose. You should ice it still, he said. The magic fixes the displacement but the inflammation is still real. Right, Luther said. Yeah. 5 noticed everything the way 5 noticed everything, in columns, in running tallies, in the growing weight of evidence that this child was not a fixed point in the timeline because of what had been done to him, but because of what he intrinsically was. Something that changed things around it by existing. Something that had been put in a cupboard and told it was bad when it was, in every measurable sense, the opposite. He added pages to the notebook. The HP, what he notices column had expanded to its own dedicated section, then its own volume. Harry's observations were frequently better than 5's. He was learning to trust them. The summer Harry turned 8, the temporal scans revealed something new. 5 ran them every morning, a habit now, routine like coffee and equations. Harry sat on the workbench in 5's lab and submitted to them with the patience of someone who understood their purpose, sometimes doing homework while 5 worked around him. The scans took 12 minutes. They had taken 12 minutes every morning for 3 years. This morning, they produced a result that made 5 stop, look at the data, look at it again, and then very quietly say a word he generally didn't say in front of Harry. What? Harry said, looking up from his maths homework. Your timeline, 5 said. He pulled the scan results up on the large screen on the wall, translating the raw data into the visual representation he used for himself. It looked like a river, the normal reading was a single clear channel, consistent, forward-moving. This morning it looked like a river that had hit a delta, splitting into branches that fanned outward in multiple directions. Look at this. Harry looked. He'd been reading 5 scan results for a year, so he understood the visual language. It's splitting, he said. Yes. Why? When a fixed point in the timeline has been severely disrupted from its designated path, 5 said, pulling up his comparison files, the timeline attempts to recalibrate. It creates parallel branches, versions of the timeline in which the fixed point's original path was maintained, alongside versions in which it wasn't. He highlighted a central thread, thicker than the others. This is you. This branch. Where you are now. Where I found you. He traced the others. These are the timelines where I didn't find you. Where you stayed in the cupboard. Where you went to Hogwarts at 11 conditioned exactly the way Dumbledore planned. Harry was quiet for a moment, looking at the branching paths. So there are other versions of me, he said. Yes. Versions that don't know what we know. Yes. Harry looked at the branches for a long time. Something was happening in his expression, that processing expression, but running deeper than usual. When we expose Dumbledore, he said slowly, those versions don't get exposed. Correct. So it's not enough to expose him in this timeline. 5 looked at him. We have to do it across all of them, Harry said. Or the ones where I'm still, where he still has me, nothing changes for those. He looked at 5. Can we? 5 had been sitting with this question for 3 days, since the first indication that the timeline was branching. He had built 4 different models. He had run the math 16 times. He had not mentioned it to Harry because Harry was 8 and he was trying, in his own extremely limited way, to manage what Harry was exposed to and when. Looking at Harry now, 8 years old, feet on the rungs of the workbench stool, homework half done, looking at a screen full of temporal branching paths with the calm assessment of someone who had been processing impossible things since before they learned to read, 5 decided that managing what Harry was exposed to was both futile and probably counterproductive. In theory, 5 said. The branches are still close. They haven't diverged far enough to require separate temporal access. If we move through them in sequence, collecting evidence at each point of divergence, building a comprehensive cross-timeline record, he stopped. It would require you to time jump. With you. Yes. I'd be the engine. You'd be the navigator, your own timeline signature would allow us to access the branches that originate from you specifically. When can we start? Harry said. You're 8, 5 said. You were 13 when you jumped to the apocalypse by yourself, Harry said. You told me. 5 opened his mouth. And I'm not by myself, Harry added. I'll be with you. 5 closed his mouth. He looked at Harry. He thought about 13-year-old 5, alone in the ruins of everything, eating beans from a tin, carrying the weight of what he knew with no one to carry it with. He thought about what it would have meant, then, to not be alone in it. We'll start the preliminary training next week, 5 said. Temporal jumping with a passenger requires specific physical and mental preparation. You'll learn the theory first. Then the practice. We don't jump until I'm satisfied you're ready. Okay, Harry said. And you finish your maths homework. Harry looked down at his homework. I already finished it. 5 looked. He had. Fine, 5 said. Then you can start reading this. He pulled a file from his desk, Temporal Mechanics, beginner level, which was still deeply complex, and slid it across the workbench. Harry opened it immediately. 5 turned back to the screen with its branching timelines, and allowed himself, very briefly, the thing that wasn't satisfaction but was near enough to it to count. They were going to need more than evidence. They were going to need a plan that worked across every version of this story. He had a child who noticed everything in magic that responded to need and a family of superhumans who would, he was increasingly certain, follow him into whatever this became. The math, for the first time in a very long time, was looking favorable. 2 weeks before Harry's 9th birthday, Klaus found 5 in the kitchen at midnight. This was unusual because Klaus generally found people in the kitchen at midnight only when he was currently attempting to sober up, and the sobriety was going well enough that he was actually present in his own eyes when he sat down across from 5 and said, without preamble, the dead are talking about him. 5 looked up. Harry. Not just his mum and dad. Other ones. From the magical war. People who died in it. Klaus wrapped his hands around a mug of tea, not drinking it, just holding the warmth. They know he's here. They know he's not where he's supposed to be. A pause. They're relieved. 5 processed this. What are they saying? Different things. But the thread is the same. Klaus looked at him. He was supposed to die. That was always the plan. Not maybe die, not risk of death. Supposed to die. The magic that killed Voldemort, it left something behind. A piece of Voldemort, inside Harry. And to destroy Voldemort completely, that piece has to be destroyed. Which means Harry has to die, 5 said. His voice was completely level. That's what Dumbledore knows, Klaus said. That's what the dead are saying he knows. He's known since shortly after Harry survived. The whole plan, the isolation, the conditioning, the gratitude, the dying for us all, Harry, it was always building toward a moment where Harry walks into death willingly. Klaus's voice was quiet. He was going to make him love it. The dying. Make him think it was his choice. He stopped. It's the most horrible thing I've ever heard, 5. And you know I've heard some things. 5 sat very still. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs Harry was asleep in his room with the window facing the garden, probably with lights near the ceiling. Does he know? Klaus asked. No, 5 said. When will you tell him? 5 looked at the table. When I have a solution, he said. I don't tell him about a problem without a solution. That's very you, Klaus said. Is there one? A solution? There's always a solution, 5 said. It's a mathematical certainty that every fixed problem has a variable that can be changed. The Horcrux, he used the term from the research, the word he'd found in commission magical records, is a piece of Voldemort's soul embedded in Harry's scar. It exists as a parasite on his own life force. The question is whether it can be removed without the damage it's designed to cause. He paused. I believe it can. I haven't proven it yet. But you're working on it. I have been for 6 months. Klaus looked at him steadily. 5. He's 8 years old. I know how old he is, Klaus. I know you know. Klaus stopped. When he smiles, the dead ones near him go brighter. Like something in them is less cold. He looked down at his mug. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. He makes the dead warmer just by being happy. He paused. So I'd quite like him to keep doing that for a very long time. That's all I'm saying. 5 looked at Klaus for a moment, at the performance that was always just slightly in front of the real thing, the feather boa and the deflection, and underneath it all the enormous bleeding heart that Klaus carried everywhere and showed no one. So would I, 5 said. It wasn't much. For 5, it was considerable. Klaus nodded, finished his tea, and stood up. Good. Find the solution, then. He straightened his robe. Also I taught him another poker variant today. He beat me 4 times out of 5. I want it noted that he's either cheating with magic or he's genuinely better than me, and I can't decide which is more alarming. Definitely the second one, 5 said. Yeah, Klaus said. That's what I thought. He swept out of the kitchen, and the door swung behind him, and 5 sat alone at the kitchen table with the weight of what he now knew and turned it over in his mind, looking at it from every angle, the way he turned over every problem that mattered. There was a solution. There was always a solution. It was a mathematical certainty. He was going to find it. Harry was 8 years old and the lights near his ceiling were warm, and he had chosen his own name back from people who called him boy, and he was learning temporal mechanics and poker and anatomy and social navigation and what it meant to be loved by people who showed it badly but meant it completely, and he was not going to die for Albus Dumbledore's plan. 5 opened a new page in his notebook. He wrote at the top, Horcrux extraction, theoretical framework. Begin. And he began. Chapter 3, the shape of a conspiracy. The first time Harry jumped through time, he threw up. This was, 5 assured him, completely normal. 5 had also thrown up his first 17 jumps, which Harry found both comforting and slightly hard to believe given how 5 moved through spacetime with the casual ease of someone stepping through a doorway they'd used 1,000 times. But the evidence was in 5's face when he said it, that flat, unperformative delivery that Harry had learned, over 4 years, to read as truth. 5 only bothered lying when the truth was tactically inconvenient. This wasn't that. Harry sat on the floor of 5's lab, back against the workbench, and breathed through it. "Take your time," 5 said, which was the closest he got to "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Harry said, which was Harry's version of "Not yet, give me a minute." They'd only gone 20 feet and 40 seconds forward, a practice jump, the temporal equivalent of a first step. Not destination travel. Just the mechanism, just the feeling of it, the full-body wrongness of existing in 2 points in time simultaneously before the second one resolved and became the present. 5 had described it in advance with clinical precision, the sensation of forward motion without physical movement, mild disorientation, possible nausea, a brief perceptual gap. All accurate. All wildly insufficient preparation for what it actually felt like, which was less like moving and more like being turned inside out and then back by something that didn't care about the contents. Harry wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, pushed his glasses up his nose, and said, "Okay." Again. 5 looked at him. "We don't have to, again," Harry said, standing up. 5 studied him for a moment with that particular attention that was his version of concern, focused, assessing, taking stock of what was actually there rather than what worry suggested might be. Then he held out his hand. Harry took it. They jumped. This time Harry only staggered. By the 3rd week of training, Harry could jump cleanly. By the 4th, he could maintain his spatial orientation through the transition, arriving in the correct posture rather than whatever physics felt like delivering him in. 5 watched this with the satisfaction of someone whose calculations had proven correct, which they always did, but whose calculations in this particular case had accounted for something beyond physical aptitude. "Your magic is interfacing with the temporal mechanism," 5 said, reviewing the energy readings from Harry's last 3 jumps. "You're not just riding the jump. You're participating in it. The magic is doing something to smooth the trajectory." He paused. "It's like you have natural shock absorption built in." "Is that useful?" Harry asked. "Extraordinarily. It means you can navigate independently inside the jump. Most people can't. I can because I've done it thousands of times. You can because of whatever your magic is doing." 5 set down the readings. "It also means that if something goes wrong mid-jump, if we're separated, if the destination destabilizes, you won't be lost. You'll correct." Harry processed this. "Have you ever been lost?" he asked. "Mid-jump?" 5 was quiet for a moment, and something moved in the set of his jaw, that particular, brief compression that meant a real answer was being chosen over a deflective one. "Yes," he said. "For 45 years. Harry looked at him steadily. "I know," he said. "You told me about the apocalypse. About being stuck there. I know I told you. Harry stopped, then continued with the careful honesty that was one of his most consistent features. "I'm not afraid of being lost if I can correct. I'm afraid of being lost and not knowing how to find my way back." He paused. "That's different." "Yes," 5 said. "It is. Did you know how to find your way back? When you were stuck?" "Eventually." 5 picked up his coffee. "I built the math until I did." Harry nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Then that's what I'll do too. If it happens." He looked at the equipment. "When do we do the real jump?" "Next week," 5 said. "We're going to 1981. October 31st. Harry's expression didn't change. It didn't need to, Five could read the specific stillness of it, the extra density that appeared when Harry was holding something large at arm's length in order to think around it. "The night my parents died," he said. "Not that night. The day before. October 30th. I want you to see what was around your family before it happened, the network, the relationships, the people who knew." Five set down his coffee. "There are records in the magical world about that period. But records are filtered. Written by survivors. I want you to see the unfiltered version." "And Dumbledore?" Harry said. "He'll be there. In the periphery. Not center stage, not yet, not in 1981, he was still running the war at that point. But the decisions he made in those last days, about your family's secret keeper, about the protection plan, those decisions are the foundation of everything that came after. The first stone in the wall." Five met Harry's eyes. "I want you to see him before he became the man who used you. I want you to see the man who chose to." Harry was quiet for a moment. 9 years old, sitting on the workbench in the morning light, about to be told he was going to watch the last full day of his parents' lives. "Okay," Harry said. "And then, will I be able to see them? Properly?" "From a distance," Five said. "We won't interact. Not on this jump. The temporal rules on non-interference, I know," Harry said. He'd read the temporal mechanics files cover to cover 3 times. "I just wanted to know if I'd be able to see them." "Yes," Five said. "You'll see them." Harry pushed his glasses up his nose. He looked at the window for a moment, at the garden and the morning sky. "Good," he said, quietly. "That's good." Godric's Hollow on October 30th, 1981 was unseasonably warm for late autumn, the kind of day that felt borrowed from a different season, golden and still. They arrived at the edge of the village in the late afternoon and moved through it carefully, Five in his commission field coat, Harry in his, smaller, newly made. Allison had insisted on proper equipment if Five was going to take him into historical jump zones, and Five had not argued because she was right. The village was a specific kind of lovely. Old stone walls and a church with a graveyard and narrow streets that curved in the organic way of places built before anyone thought about grids. Smoke from chimneys. The smell of burning leaves. Five held Harry back at the end of the lane that led to the Potter's house. "We observe from here," he said. "We don't get closer than this." Harry nodded. He was already looking down the lane. The house was small and warm-windowed, light coming through the curtains in the specific amber of a family inside doing ordinary things. As they watched, a shape moved past the window, a man, tall, with hair that went in every direction, carrying something. Then another shape, smaller, with red hair. Harry was very still beside Five. "That's them," he said. He said it simply, the way you say things when the reality of them is so much bigger than anything you could have prepared for. "Yes," Five said. James Potter moved past the window again, and this time they could see he was carrying a child, a baby, small and dark-haired, and he was laughing about something, face tilted up and teeth showing, and Lily appeared behind him with her hand on his shoulder and she was laughing too, and the two of them moved through the lit window in the ordinary way of people who don't know what's coming and were, in this one last evening, just happy. Harry didn't speak for a long time. Five didn't either. He watched the house and he watched Harry watching it, and he did not reach for anything to say because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be smaller than the moment. "They look like good people," Harry said finally. His voice was steady. "I mean, I knew they were. From what everyone said. But seeing it is different." He was quiet again. "He carries me like I'm important," he said, about his father. Like he wanted to be doing exactly that. Five looked at the window, at the shape of James Potter moving through his last night with his son. "He did," he said. "And she touches his shoulder," Harry said. "She didn't have to do that. She just did it." He paused. "Like it was natural." "It was," Five said. Harry absorbed this. Then he said, with the precision that always arrived when his thinking had moved through the feeling and come out the other side, Dumbledore knew this would happen to them. Not knew, Five said. Suspected. Strongly. The intelligence about Voldemort targeting them was clear. His response was to recommend the Fidelius charm, and he recommended Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper, Harry said. He'd read the file. Pettigrew was a Death Eater. Had been for 2 years when Dumbledore recommended him. Did Dumbledore know that? That, Five said, is the question I've been trying to answer for 4 years. He pulled out his notebook, not to write but to look at, the pages of accumulated evidence, the timeline. The balance of the data suggests yes. That he knew, or had sufficient evidence to know, that Pettigrew was compromised. That recommending him meant recommending the leak. That the leak meant Voldemort finding the Potters. He paused. What I can't yet prove is intent. Whether he engineered it or simply permitted it. Does it matter? Harry said. His voice was quiet and even. If you can stop something and you don't, is that different from doing it? Five looked at him. 9 years old. Standing in the last evening light of his parents' last peaceful day, asking a moral philosophy question that most adults never got to. No, Five said. I don't think it is. They stood there a while longer. Then a figure appeared at the far end of the lane, elderly, long-robed, white-bearded, moving with the deliberate calm of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had already decided what to do when they got there. He stopped at the gate of the Potter's house. He looked up at the window. His expression was, and this was what struck Five, watching through the temporal observational filter, not cold. Not calculating. Genuinely, visibly sad. That was what made him terrible. Not the calculation. The sadness. The absolute genuine grief of a man who had decided the cost was worth it and still felt the weight of paying it. Harry looked at Dumbledore at the gate. Dumbledore did not look up the lane. He couldn't see them, temporal observational mode rendered them functionally invisible to timeline inhabitants, but Five watched Harry look at him with the measuring, careful attention that was Harry's most powerful tool, and he saw the moment Harry understood something that Five had been trying to put into words for months. He loves them, Harry said. Very quietly. Doesn't he? He looks sad because he actually loves them. In his way, Five said. And he's going to let them die anyway. Yes. Because the plan needs me to grow up without parents. Without safety. Without anyone who loves me. Harry's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that Five recognized, the particular tension of a person who is holding their voice level through will, not ease. He needed me to have nothing so I'd be grateful for whatever he gave me. Yes, Five said. And so I wouldn't have anyone who might tell me the truth. Yes. Harry looked at Dumbledore at the gate for another moment. Then he looked back at the warm-lit window, at the shapes of his parents moving through their last ordinary evening, and he said something that Five wrote down in the notebook that night from memory, word for word, because it was too precise to approximate. I'm going to make sure every version of this story ends differently, Harry said. Not for me. For them. So they didn't, so it means something. So what happened to them doesn't just get used. He paused. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Five said. Okay. Harry turned away from the house and looked up at Five. His eyes were bright behind his glasses, not with tears, with the specific brightness of someone who has found the thing that tells them exactly what they're doing and why. Can we go now? Yes, Five said. He took Harry's hand. They jumped. Back in the lab, Five ran the standard post-jump analysis while Harry sat on the workbench eating the sandwich Vanya had sent down with them in a paper bag because she did this every time, silently, without being asked, the same way she did most things that mattered. Tell me what you noticed, Five said. This was their standard debrief, Five's version of emotional processing, which was to route the emotional content through the analytical mechanism so it came out as data rather than as the thing that undid you. Harry had learned to do this fluently. He finished his sandwich, brushed crumbs off his coat, and said, 3 things. Go. First, the house had additional enchantments I could feel even through the observation filter. Layered ones, old ones. Someone had been adding protective magic to that house for months. It was substantial work. Whoever did it knew what they were doing and cared about the outcome. He paused. Which means whoever recommended Pettigrew as the secret keeper understood that the protections were serious and would need to be specifically circumvented. It wasn't opportunistic. It was surgical. 5 wrote. Second. Dumbledore stopped at the gate. He didn't go in. He looked at the window for exactly. Harry closed his eyes, replaying, 47 seconds. Then he turned and left. A pause. He could have changed the secret keeper. He was there. He had the authority. He chose not to. Third. Harry opened his eyes. There was another person watching the house. On the opposite side, behind the hedgerow on the east end of the lane. I almost missed them, they were very still, very practiced at not being noticed. He looked at 5. Do you know who that was? 5 stopped writing. Describe them. Medium height. Dark cloak. They had a wand in their hand but weren't using it. Just watching. Harry paused. And they were watching Dumbledore, not the house. Like they were following him, not checking on the Potters. 5 sat back. This was new. He hadn't noticed this on his own preliminary reconnaissance of this date. He'd focused on the house, on Dumbledore, on the timeline's main actors. I missed that, he said. I know. I didn't say it to, I know why you said it. It's good observation. 5 was already pulling up the Commission's archived field records for Godric's Hollow. Someone was watching Dumbledore watch the Potters. That's a surveillance layer I haven't accounted for. Could it be someone else who suspected him? Harry said. Possibly. Or someone who worked for him and didn't know they were being observed. 5 scrolled through the records. Or someone who was watching the whole situation on behalf of a third party. Is there a third party? There's always a third party, 5 said. In my experience, every two-sided conflict has someone watching from a distance deciding which side benefits them most. He found the archived visual data, pulled it up, ran it through the observational filter at the spatial coordinates Harry had given him. The figure was there. Clear as anything. Standing in the shadow of the hedgerow with a wand in hand and their eyes fixed on Dumbledore's retreating back. 5 enhanced the image. He recognized the face, eventually, after cross-referencing 3 separate Commission magical community dossiers. Ha, he said. Who is it? Harry asked. Her name is Minerva McGonagall, 5 said. She is, one of Dumbledore's most trusted people. His deputy headmistress. Runs the school he runs. He looked at the image. She was watching him. Harry was quiet for a moment. Do you think she suspected him? I think, 5 said carefully, that she knew something was wrong. Whether she knew what, or how much, that's what we need to find out. He sat back. This is useful. This is very useful. If McGonagall had doubts, if she was watching him with independent concern, then she's not part of his plan. She might be reachable. A witness from inside, Harry said. Yes. 5 looked at him. You spotted her when I didn't. You were watching Dumbledore, Harry said. I was watching everything else. Amen. 5 turned back to his work. Good division of labor. We should go back again, Harry said. Different date. I want to see more of what happened around my parents before, I want to understand the full network. Who knew, who suspected, who was working with him and who wasn't. We will. We need to build the timeline in sequence. Understanding the actors before we can assess their testimony. 5 paused. This is going to take time. I know, Harry said. He finished the last of Vanya's sandwich. 5. I'm okay, Harry said. I know you've been watching to see if I am. I am. It was hard, seeing them. But it was good hard. Not bad hard. He met Five's eyes. Thank you for taking me. Five held his gaze for a moment. You're welcome, he said, which was not something he said often enough that it had lost meaning. The investigation took on a new shape after Godric's Hollow. Harry began maintaining his own research files, physical ones, in notebooks like Five's but different in character, less equation-dense and more narrative, mapping the relationships and motivations of the people in Dumbledore's orbit with the social precision he'd developed from years of watching Allison work a room and Diego read people and Klaus move through the world in a way that seemed chaotic but was actually deeply perceptive. He had a gift for the human architecture of things, for seeing not just what people did but why, and not just why but what they were trying to protect when they did it. McGonagall became a consistent thread in his notes. He cross-referenced her known timeline against the decisions Dumbledore had made, mapped the moments of divergence, times when she had been notably absent from key events, times when commission records showed her initiating independent inquiries, times when accounts of her behavior showed the specific combination of loyalty and discomfort that Five had learned to identify as a person who loves an institution but is starting to see around its edges. She watched Privet Drive, Harry told Diego one evening, in the kitchen, while Diego sharpened his knives and Harry worked through his notes. The commission records show she was there the morning of November 1, 1981. She was already there when Dumbledore arrived. She'd been watching the whole street. Diego looked up. Watching for what? I think she was looking for me, Harry said. Or for evidence of me. She sat outside all day. That's not what someone does if they're following orders. That's what someone does if they're worried. He looked up from his notes. She cared about what happened to me. She just wasn't strong enough to stop it. So she's a witness who has conscience, Diego said. Yes. And she's still there. Right now, in the current timeline, she's teaching at Hogwarts under Dumbledore and has been for decades. Harry traced a line in his notes. When we build the exposure, she should be one of the first people we go to. She'll be hard to convince because she'll feel like she's betraying someone she loves. But she already knows something is wrong. She's been knowing it for years. Diego set down the whetstone. You're good at this, he said. The reading people thing. Allison taught me, Harry said. Yeah, but she didn't make you good at it. She just showed you how to use what was already there. Diego picked up a knife, examined the edge. When I was your age, I was good at throwing things at walls and being angry. Harry looked at him. You're still good at that. Accurate, Diego said. He pointed the knife at Harry's notes. This is going to work. What you and Five are building. It's going to work. It has to work across every timeline, Harry said. Not just this one. Then it will. You'll make it. Harry looked at Diego for a moment, at this person who had been one of the first to be kind to him, who had let him sit in doorways and watch, who had said nothing is sending you back on a morning 4 years ago with a cut on his arm and done it with the simple iron certainty of someone who meant it all the way through. You know, Harry said, when Five brought me here, I thought, he stopped, looking for the words. I thought it would be temporary. That eventually it would end and I'd go back or go somewhere else and it would have just been a good interval. Diego looked at him. But it's not an interval, Harry said. Is it? This is just, where I live. These are my people. Diego held his gaze for a moment. Then he said, gruffly, yeah, kid. Obviously. Harry nodded, and went back to his notes, and said nothing else, and neither did Diego, but the kitchen was comfortable in the specific way of a space where two people understand each other well enough that silence is just another form of company. The cross-timeline jumps began in spring, when Harry was 9.5. 5 had mapped 7 primary branches, the largest divergences from Harry's original designated path, each one representing a significantly different version of how Harry's story had been meant to go. They weren't all Dursleys to Hogwarts. Some branched earlier, at moments 5 had identified as decision points in Dumbledore's long game. One branch diverged as early as 1979, when a prophecy was first made and Dumbledore had to decide what to do with the knowledge of it. One branched at the moment of the Potter's death, where a different choice about the secret keeper would have produced a different outcome. Most of them, though, branched around the night of Harry's survival, divergences in how Dumbledore managed the aftermath, what he said to whom, which versions of events he allowed into the historical record. The first cross-timeline jump was to Branch 2, the timeline closest to this one, in which 5 had come to Privet Drive 6 months later and found Harry 6 months worse. A small difference in timeline terms. Not a small difference in any other terms. They arrived in the Commission's safe house in Brussels, which was a temporal anchor point, and 5 ran the cross-timeline calibration while Harry stood at the window looking at the Brussels skyline in the grey morning. He looked the same here as he did in their timeline, same age, same weather of hair, same glasses, but 5 noticed the particular quality of his stillness, the way he was preparing himself for what the difference might look like. In this branch, 5 said, reviewing the scanned data, I found you in February of 1986. 7 months later than our timeline. What does that change? Harry asked. I'll show you, 5 said. We're going to make 3 observation stops. First, Privet Drive, January 1986. Second, a specific moment in Dumbledore's timeline, October 1987. Third, a later divergence point in 1989, where this branches Harry's trajectory becomes clearly different from ours. He paused. We're not interacting. We're collecting temporal evidence, visual, energetic, relational data that the Commission's recording equipment will document as admissible cross-timeline testimony. Will it actually be admissible? Harry asked. In whatever forum we eventually present this in. The magical world has its own governing body, 5 said. The Wiesengemot. Their evidentiary standards are different from the Commission's, but cross-timeline temporal records have been submitted in magical governance proceedings before, in documented historical cases. With the right framing, and the right witnesses, they'll be recognized. He picked up the recorder. Ready? Harry turned from the window. Yes. Privet Drive in January 1986 was grey and cold, the garden gnome dusted with frost, the Ford Cortina in the drive and the identical net curtains and all the aggressive ordinariness of number 4 exactly as 5 remembered it. They stood at the end of the path in temporal observation mode. The door opened. A large man, Vernon Dursley, whom 5 had only seen in Commission profile photographs, came out with a briefcase and got into the car and left. Shortly after, a large blond boy appeared in the front window, pressing his face against the glass from inside. Then a smaller shape appeared behind him and was immediately pulled back out of sight. There, Harry said quietly. Yes. The observation was brief, they were documenting, not watching. 5 ran the temporal recorder while Harry stood beside him with his arms at his sides and his face doing the thing it did when he was running the feeling through the analytical track. When they'd collected enough, 5 touched Harry's shoulder and they moved on. The second stop, October 1987 in this branch, was a meeting room in the Ministry of Magic in London, accessed through a temporal overlap point that allowed them to observe the interior. Dumbledore sat across a table from a ministry official named Cornelius Fudge, who would one day be Minister for Magic, and who was at this point a mid-level functionary listening with the attentiveness of a man who understood that listening to powerful people was its own form of currency. Dumbledore was talking about Harry. 5 had the recorder running. He listened to Dumbledore's voice, warm, measured, avuncular, the voice of a man you would trust instinctively, describe Harry Potter's situation in Privet Drive as entirely satisfactory, the protections holding, the boy safe and well adjusted. He listened to Dumbledore describe the Dursleys as good people, perhaps not the warmest, but reliable. He watched Fudge nod along with the expression of someone being told what he wanted to hear by someone he trusted to tell him the truth. Beside Five, Harry's jaw was very tight. "He knows," Harry said, almost inaudible. "He knows what it is in there. He visited. He knows." "Yes," Five said. "And he's saying safe and well adjusted." "Yes." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Get every word of that," he said. "I have it," Five said. They watched until the meeting ended and Dumbledore left, and Five caught the moment, the exact second when the door closed behind Dumbledore and Fudge turned back to his papers, and in that second Fudge's face did something complicated. Not quite doubt. Something earlier than doubt. The first shadow of a question that hadn't fully formed yet. "Fudge wasn't entirely convinced," Harry said. "No. We should add him to the list of people who might be reachable." Harry looked at the empty meeting room. He wants to believe Dumbledore because it's easier. But part of him knows something doesn't add up. He paused. People like that, they just need someone to give them permission to trust the part that already knows. Five looked at him. Harry was looking at the room with the expression he wore when his social analysis ran ahead of his years, which was most of the time. "You're going to be extraordinary in a room," Five said. Harry glanced at him. "You think so?" "Yes. Simple, unadorned. You already are." Harry pushed his glasses up his nose and said nothing else, but something in his posture shifted, that slight, fractional opening that happened when a word landed somewhere it mattered. He didn't carry compliments lightly. He held them carefully, the way you hold something you've been given rarely enough that each one has weight. The third stop was harder. This branch's Harry was 7 years old, and they observed him from the temporal distance in a setting Five had not expected, a classroom. A primary school. An ordinary primary school in Little Whinging, and the teacher at the front was talking about ancient history, and the children were at their desks, and Harry, Branch 2 Harry, was at a desk in the back corner. He was not doing what the other children were doing. He was sitting completely still with his hands folded on the desk and his face arranged in the precise blankness of someone who has learned that drawing attention brings consequence. His uniform was too large. His glasses were the wrong prescription. Five could see it in the angle at which he was tilting his head, the slight squint of someone for whom the world was perpetually out of focus. He had not raised his hand once in the 40 minutes they observed. And the temporal scanner showed his energy signature, the same signature as their Harry, the same warm, responsive, deeply alive magic, compressed. Turned inward. Present but contained, like something breathing through a very small opening. He suppressed it, Harry said. He meant his own magic. His voice was very quiet. He's learned to keep it down. So they don't notice. Yes, Five said. Because they punish him when they notice. Yes. The silence between them had a texture to it. Five looked at Branch 2 Harry sitting in the back corner of the classroom with his compressed energy and his wrong prescription glasses and his folded hands, and then he looked at their Harry, 9.5, in his proper field coat, glasses that fit, magic that had been expanding for 4 years in the warm air of a house that let it, and he thought about the mathematics of small decisions. The specific calculus of being 7 months late. I want to get him out, Harry said. We can't interact, Five said. I know. I know we can't. Harry looked at Branch 2 Harry. It's just, I know what he's thinking. Exactly what he's thinking. He's thinking that if he's very still and very quiet then today won't be bad. He paused. I thought that every day. I know. But we're going to fix it, Harry said. We're going to fix it in every branch. Yes, Five said. That's why we're here. We're documenting so that when the exposure happens, it happens everywhere simultaneously. So there's no branch where he gets to start over. Harry looked at him. Can we really do that? Simultaneously across branches? In theory. With enough coordinated temporal anchoring and the right delivery mechanism, 5 stopped, because Harry was already nodding, already running ahead. The testimony gets delivered simultaneously, Harry said. In each branch, at the same relative moment. So there's no version where he has time to rebuild, because every version collapses at once. Yes, 5 said. Exactly that. We need people in each branch, Harry said. Witnesses who can be activated simultaneously. McGonagall. Fudge, maybe. Anyone else inside the magical world who has doubts and just needs the information. He paused. And we need something undeniable. Not just testimony. Something physical. Evidence that can't be reframed or contextualized away. I've been thinking about that, 5 said. He pulled out his notebook. The Horcrux. Harry went still. 5 had told him about the Horcrux 6 months ago, in the office, late at night, with the solution already outlined in the notebook alongside the problem. He'd said what Klaus told him, and he'd said what he'd found in the research, and then immediately he'd said and this is what I found about extraction, and the two of them had sat with it for a long time. Harry had asked good questions. He'd processed it in his methodical way, run it through the analytical track, filed it. He hadn't fallen apart. He'd said, eventually, so the plan is to remove it, and 5 had said the plan is to remove it, and that had been that. The Horcrux is evidence, Harry said now. The most compelling kind. It's a piece of Voldemort's soul in your scar. It's verifiable by magical means, any competent magical healer or forensic specialist would recognize it immediately. And it proves that Dumbledore knew, because the records show he commissioned the specific diagnostic that would have revealed it in 1982. 5 paused. He knew it was there. He never told anyone. He never had it removed. He needed it in place for the plan to work. Because it's part of how Voldemort gets finally destroyed, Harry said. With me. He said it without inflection, the fact of it simply stated, stored, processed. With you, unless we remove it, 5 said. Which we're going to do before anyone has a chance to use it as a plot device. Harry looked at him with a small, sharp expression that in another person's face would have been a smile of dark amusement. Before anyone has a chance, he said. Correct. How close are we on the extraction framework? I've completed the theoretical model. I need to run it past someone with actual magical healing expertise. He paused. Which means, when you go to Hogwarts, I'll find Madame Pomfrey, Harry said immediately. The school's Medowitch, they discussed her in their analysis of potential allies inside Hogwarts. She won't be part of Dumbledore's plan. She's a healer. Her instinct is going to be to remove something harmful from a patient. Yes, 5 said. If we can get her the framework before you arrive, I can bring it in, Harry said. In my head. I can have it memorized. You'd have to commit the entire theoretical model to memory. It's complex. Harry looked at him with an expression that was very specifically the expression of someone who had been memorizing 5's work for 4 years and knew exactly what he was capable of. Give me a week, he said. A week, 5 agreed. They stood for another moment in the observation space, looking at the classroom, at the boy in the back corner with his folded hands, at the specific dignity of someone trying to make themselves small enough to be safe. Then Harry said, "Let's go home." 5 held out his hand. Harry took it. They jumped. The Umbrella Academy on a Tuesday evening was its own specific kind of organized chaos. Diego was in the training room, the rhythmic sound of knives and impact coming through the floor. Klaus was performing what he described as a séance in the east sitting room but which smelled strongly of Vanya's good candles and sounded mostly like Klaus asking increasingly impertinent questions of whatever presence he'd managed to make contact with. Allison was on the phone in the parlor, doing the Celebrity magazine interview voice, laughing at something. Luther was in the kitchen looking at a structural diagram of something and eating cereal from the box. Harry walked in and Luther looked up. "How was it?" "Useful," Harry said. He dropped his field coat on the chair and pulled out his notes. "We found a witness I hadn't expected. And I want to add something to the cross-timeline exposure strategy." Luther looked at him, this 9-year-old with his notebooks and his notes and his completely matter-of-fact approach to reordering history. "You want to add something to the strategy," he said. "Yes." "Okay," Luther said, "because that was the thing about Harry, you didn't say you're 9, this can wait." "You said okay." "You said okay because he was right more often than he wasn't and because he'd earned the collaboration the same way any of them had, which was by showing up and doing the work." "What is it?" "We need someone in each branch who can anchor the exposure in real time. Not just documents delivered. An actual person, alive, present, who can speak to what they witnessed." Harry sat down across from Luther. "In our branch, we're building that network. But in the others, we have to identify the same network independently and activate it simultaneously." He spread out his notes. "I've been thinking, some of the people who are going to be our witnesses are the same in every branch. Dumbledore didn't change who he used. He just changed the details. The underlying structure is the same." Luther looked at the notes. At the names Harry had listed, the connections mapped, the network diagram. It was, objectively, more sophisticated than most of the threat analysis the Commission produced. "This is good," he said. "I know," Harry said, without arrogance, just acknowledgement. 5 had taught him the difference between accuracy about your own capability and pride in it, and Harry had learned the distinction precisely. Luther pushed his cereal box aside and leaned over the notes. "Walk me through it," he said. Harry walked him through it. 5 came in from the lab 20 minutes later and found them both bent over Harry's notes, Luther asking questions and Harry answering them, and he stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and watched. The shape of the conspiracy they were building against, the architecture of it, the scope of it, the cold intelligence of someone who had spent decades arranging lives like chess pieces, was becoming more visible by the day. More documented. More exposed. And on the other side of it was this, a 9-year-old at a kitchen table, talking strategy with his enormous unlikely brother, in a house that was loud and strange and not designed for him and was, indisputably and entirely, home. 5 went to put the kettle on. The math was looking better every day. Chapter 4, Letters and Lightning. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in July, which was the year Harry turned 11, and it arrived the way things in the magical world apparently insisted on arriving, dramatically and without consideration for the people already in the room. 5 was in the middle of a commission debrief. Harry was at the kitchen table with his temporal mechanics notes. Vanya was practicing scales in the music room, the sound of it drifting through the walls in the particular way that meant she was working through something emotionally and using the violin as the processing mechanism. The kitchen window was open because it was summer and the morning was warm, and the owl came through it with the precise, unbothered confidence of an animal that had never once considered the possibility of being unwelcome. It landed on Harry's notes. Harry looked at it. The owl looked at him. It extended its leg with the letter attached, in the manner of something completing a task it found slightly beneath its dignity. Harry untied the letter. The owl hopped once, found a piece of toast that had been abandoned at the edge of the table, took it, and left through the window it had come in. Harry said. He looked at the envelope. Mr. H. Potter, the Umbrella Academy, wherever that is, not Surrey anymore. The address had been crossed out 3 times and rewritten, the handwriting progressively more frustrated. The seal on the back was a crest, H, P, R, S intertwined, an eagle, a badger, a lion, a snake. He recognized it from 5's research files. He'd been looking at it for 2 years. He opened it. 5 came into the kitchen 3 minutes later, mid-sentence on something about temporal calibration with Diego, and Harry held up the letter without looking away from it. 5 stopped talking. Hogwarts, Harry said. Yes, 5 said. It says I've got a place. It says a representative will come to assist with enrollment if required. Harry set the letter down on the table and looked at 5. A representative. Do you think that means, Dumbledore? 5 said. In the normal sequence, yes. In the original timeline branches, he comes personally. He likes to make the first contact. Establish the relationship. He paused. We're going to let him come. Diego looked at 5. We're going to let Dumbledore come here. Yes. To this house. Yes. Diego's expression ran through approximately 4 phases in quick succession, the last of which resolved into something that was almost anticipatory. Okay, he said. I'm going to be home for that. Everyone's going to be home for that, Harry said. He looked at the letter again. His expression was the particular one, not the flat filing one, not the processing one, but the sharp, specific look of someone who has been waiting for a door to open and has now heard the handle turn. He's going to expect a scared 11-year-old who's overwhelmed by the magical world and grateful for the guidance. Yes, 5 said. He's going to get me, Harry said. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. That's going to be a significant adjustment for him, Diego said. Good, Harry said. Albus Dumbledore arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in August, which gave them 3 weeks to prepare, which was more than enough. 5 sent the response to the old inquiry from Hogwarts confirming that Harry Potter was in residence and that the Academy would receive a representative at 2 p.m. on the 15th. He wrote it in his most neutral commission-adjacent formal tone, which gave nothing away except competence, which was sufficient. Dumbledore would assume a mundane household with some unusual features. He would assume a confused child, a surprised adult guardian, a situation he could guide. He would walk in the door and begin to understand, very quickly, that his assumptions needed revision. Harry spent the 3 weeks not preparing in the sense of rehearsing speeches or memorizing arguments. He'd been preparing for this for 6 years. He spent the 3 weeks finishing his current cross-timeline analysis file, completing the Horcrux extraction theoretical framework from memory as promised, and spending a considerable amount of time in the training room with Diego, not because he needed the physical preparation but because training was where he thought most clearly. The morning of the 15th, Vanya made breakfast for everyone, which was her version of fortification. Klaus wore his best coat, which was dark blue velvet and technically a woman's coat from the 1940s but which he wore with total commitment. Luther rearranged the furniture in the sitting room, not for aesthetic reasons but structural ones, sight lines, entry points, the specific positioning of comfortable-looking chairs that still faced the door. Diego sharpened knives he wasn't going to use. Allison did her hair and then did it again in a different way that communicated the same thing the first way had, which was I am not someone you underestimate. 5 sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and read the newspaper. Harry came down at 1:30 in clothes that fit properly, Allison had seen to that years ago, and his glasses, which had been replaced with ones that actually corrected his vision, and sat across from 5. Nervous? 5 said, without looking up from the newspaper. No, Harry said. 5 turned a page. You should eat something. I ate. You ate half a piece of toast. That's something. 5 put the newspaper down and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. They had, by this point, developed a conversational register that was largely composed of looking at each other, which carried approximately 80% of the information either of them needed to exchange. What the look said now, from 5 to Harry, was, you know exactly what you're doing. You've known for 6 years. Don't perform it. Just be it. What the look back said, from Harry to 5, was, I know. I will. Thank you for not saying it like that. He's going to be charming, 5 said. I know. Genuinely. He's not going to be a villain. He's going to be a kind, warm, impressive old man who makes you feel like the most important person in the room. I know. And the thing that makes him dangerous, 5 said, is that he means it. He's going to genuinely like you. The warmth isn't fake. Harry was quiet for a moment. "That's what makes it hard," he said. "Not that he's pretending. He genuinely thinks he's doing right by me. He thinks the plan is kind." "Yes," Five said. "But good intentions and good actions aren't the same thing." "No," Five said. "They never have been." Harry nodded. "I'll be fine," he said, and it wasn't bravado, it was just fact, which was the most Harry thing in the world. 2 o'clock came, and then 5 passed, and then at 8 minutes past the hour the doorbell rang and Pogo, who had been persuaded, with some difficulty, to answer it rather than any of the humans, opened the door. Albus Dumbledore stepped into the Umbrella Academy. He was exactly as the records described. Tall, white-bearded, half-moon glasses over eyes that were a blue so pale they were almost silver, robes that moved like water and were the deep blue of a sky just past twilight. He had the physical presence of someone who had spent so many decades being the most capable person in any room that it had become structural, built into the way he moved. He looked around the entrance hall with the mild, pleasant expression of someone who found everything somewhat interesting and nothing particularly surprising. Pogo led him to the sitting room. Everyone was there. Dumbledore paused in the doorway. 6 people looked back at him, arranged in the specific configuration Luther had designed, not a line, not a confrontation, but a room that was clearly inhabited by people who were comfortable in it. Klaus on the arm of the sofa. Diego by the fireplace. Allison in the armchair nearest the window. Luther standing near the bookcase. Vanya on the sofa, small and still. And 5 in the chair nearest the door, which was tactical on its face and also sent a very particular message about who occupied the threshold. Harry was in the center of the sofa. Dumbledore's eyes found him immediately. And 5 watched what happened in the old man's face. The warmth that arrived there was genuine, he'd been right about that, the particular softening of someone who had held an abstract love for an idea and was now confronted with the reality of it. Harry in person, dark-haired, green-eyed, the scar visible above his glasses, 11 years old and sitting with the relaxed, anchored ease of someone entirely at home, was clearly not what Dumbledore had expected, and 5 watched the old man process the delta between expectation and reality with the skilled equanimity of someone who had been recalibrating his plans for 60 years. "Harry," Dumbledore said, warmly. "My goodness. Look at you." "Hello," Harry said. "Pleasant. Open. Entirely unawed. I'm Albus Dumbledore. I'm the headmaster of Hogwarts School, I know who you are," Harry said. "Still pleasant. Sit down, please." A fractional pause. "Very small." Dumbledore sat. "These are my family," Harry said, without gesturing around the room, because he didn't need to, the room was self-evident. "This is where I live." "Yes," Dumbledore said, looking around with the mild interest again, recalibrating. "I must say, I was rather surprised when the letter found you here rather than, well. You were meant to be with your aunt and uncle." "I was 5 when I left there," Harry said. "I've lived here for 6 years." "I see." Dumbledore's expression was carefully, skillfully warm. "And has no one, were you never told about the wizarding world? About your parents?" "About everything," Harry said. "I know everything." Another fractional pause. Longer this time. "I see," Dumbledore said again, with a slight adjustment in register, away from the gentle revelation approach, towards something more direct. He was, 5 had to acknowledge, fast. He read the room quickly and adapted. That was part of what made him formidable. "Well then. You'll know how significant your letter is. Hogwarts is the finest school of magic in Britain," Harry said, "with a curriculum running from 1st to 7th year, covering transfiguration, charms, herbology, history of magic, defense against the dark arts, potions, astronomy, and elective subjects from 3rd year. The current curriculum was significantly revised in 1942 following a review commissioned by the Board of Governors." He paused. "I've been looking forward to it." Dumbledore looked at him. The warmth in his expression had not diminished, if anything, it had intensified, become something more specific and more complicated. "You've done your research," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "And these people," Dumbledore looked at Five, precisely. Five met his gaze with the flat professional attention he used for commission debriefs. "You are his guardian?" "Among other things," Five said. "And you've been educating him?" "We all have," Allison said, from the armchair. Her tone was conversational and light and absolutely impenetrable. "He's a quick study." Dumbledore looked at Harry again. The old man's extraordinary mind was visibly working. Five could almost see the adjustments being made, the recalibrations, the rapid assessment of what this child was and what the plan needed him to be and how large the gap between those two things had become. "Harry," he said, "I wonder if we might speak privately." "No," Harry said. Simple. Unapologetic. Not rude. Just a fact delivered without performance. Dumbledore absorbed this. "I see," he said, for the third time, each repetition carrying more information than the last. He folded his hands on his knee, and Five noticed the slight tightening of his fingers, the first sign of something below the warm surface. Not anger. Thinking. Heavy, active thinking. "Well. I had hoped to discuss your situation more, personally. There are things about your history that I should very much like to tell you myself." "I know about my parents," Harry said. "I know they were James and Lily Potter. I know they were killed by Voldemort on October 31st, 1981. I know about the Fidelius charm and about Peter Pettigrew." He paused, and Five watched Dumbledore go very still. "I know about the prophecy." The room was completely quiet. Dumbledore's face did something that was, for the first time since he'd walked in, not fully controlled. The warmth didn't disappear, but it was briefly crowded by something else, a rapid, flickering sequence of assessments, responses, adjustments. He recovered in under 2 seconds, which was faster than most people could have managed, and when he spoke his voice was the same measured warmth as before. "Then you know," he said, slowly, "that your situation is a complicated one. And that there are people who mean you harm." "I know about Voldemort," Harry said. "I know he survived. I know he'll come back eventually." He held Dumbledore's gaze steadily. "I know about the Horcruxes." This time the stillness in Dumbledore's face lasted longer. He stopped. Restarted. "That is a great deal of knowledge for a young person to be carrying." "I'm not carrying it alone," Harry said. He glanced at Five, briefly, and back. "I haven't been carrying anything alone for 6 years." Dumbledore followed the glance to Five. He studied Five with the specific attention of a man reassessing an obstacle he had initially classified as a minor one. "You've been researching," he said to Five. "Extensively," Five said. "May I ask in what capacity?" "No," Five said. A long moment. Then Dumbledore turned back to Harry, and something shifted in the quality of his gaze, the warmth recalibrating into something that was still genuine but no longer the specific warmth of a man executing a plan. It was now the warmth of someone encountering something unexpectedly real. Something that required actual response rather than performance. "Harry," he said, "I owe you an explanation." "You owe me several," Harry said. "But I don't need them today. I'm going to come to Hogwarts. I want to learn. I want to understand the magical world I'm part of." He paused. "I'm going to do that on my own terms." "Of course," Dumbledore said. And then, more quietly, with something in it that was not calculated, "I'm very glad that you've been," he stopped. Looked at the room, at the 6 people who clearly loved this child and had been here for 6 years. "I'm glad you weren't alone," he said. And it was true. That was the devastating thing, the thing that had been true in Godric's Hollow at the gate and was true here. Albus Dumbledore was not a man who was glad about cruelty. He was a man who had decided cruelty was sometimes the cost of necessity and had found a way to carry that weight with apparent grace. But he was genuinely glad Harry had not been alone. Which was exactly the kind of complicated truth that made him so hard to simply condemn. Harry looked at him, and Five knew Harry saw all of it, saw it the way he saw everything, clearly, without sentimentality. "I'll see you in September, Professor," Harry said. Dumbledore stood. He looked at Harry one more time, with that extraordinary gaze that had spent so many decades reading people, and Five watched him read Harry and find, possibly for the first time in many decades, someone he couldn't quite map. "Indeed," Dumbledore said. "I look forward to it." He left. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds after the door closed. Then Klaus said, "Well. He's absolutely terrifying and I think he genuinely likes you." "Yes," Harry said. "Both of those things." "How do you feel?" Vanya asked. Harry considered the question with actual attention rather than reflexive reassurance. "Like the first move has been made," he said. "And like everything that happens next is going to be real." "It's always been real," Diego said. "I know," Harry said. "But now it's here." Diagon Alley was, as an experience, essentially chaos with a shopping list. Five navigated it with the focused efficiency of someone who had been to more chaotic places but none of them requiring the purchase of a cauldron. Harry moved beside him through the crowd on the cobbled street, taking everything in with that systematic attention that was, in a place like this, indistinguishable from wonder, because for all the analysis and research and temporal jumping, he had never actually been here, never been in the physical reality of the wizarding world, never heard the specific sounds of it or smelled the particular combination of cauldron fumes and old paper and something that crackled in the air the way electricity crackled near the Academy's equipment. His magic responded immediately. Five could feel it in the air around Harry, the thing that Vanya had described as from inside, the responsive warm living quality of it, expanding slightly in the presence of its own kind the way a muscle responds to use after a long period of rest. Harry didn't seem fully aware of it, or if he was too busy looking at everything to comment on it. "Ollivanders first," Five said, consulting the list. "Wand is the priority. Everything else can be managed in order." "Okay," Harry said. He was looking at a display of self-stirring cauldrons in a shop window. Then at the bookshop. Then at an apothecary with things in jars that defied taxonomy. His eyes moved like a cartographer's, systematic, storing, recording. Ollivanders was dusty and narrow and smelled of cedar and something underneath it that had no ordinary name. Mr. Ollivander himself emerged from between shelves of wand boxes with the specific energy of someone who found every customer a genuinely interesting problem, and he looked at Harry over his measuring tape and said, "Harry Potter," in a tone that suggested he had been expecting this visit for a decade. "Yes," Harry said. "Your parents," Ollivander said. "James, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable. Your mother, willow, 10 1/4. Quite remarkable, her wand." "Quite," he stopped, looking at Harry's scar with the frank professional attention of a craftsman examining relevant specifications. "Well. We'll see what chooses you." The measuring tape did its autonomous work while Ollivander began pulling boxes. He worked with the focused energy of someone running a complex experiment, each wand presented and assessed in under 30 seconds, Harry's expression remaining patient and attentive through 8 failed attempts. Five watched from near the door, noting the quality of the failures, not random misfires, but very specific non-resonances, each one telling Ollivander something about the parameters. The 9th wand was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. Harry picked it up and something happened in the shop that Five's temporal sensitivity registered as a ripple, a small, definitive pulse of energy, warm and unmistakable, the specific feeling of a resonance finding its home. The lights in the shop brightened briefly. A pile of wand boxes at the far end of the shelf shifted. And Harry looked at the wand in his hand with an expression that was new, not analytical, not processing, but something simpler and more unguarded than that. Something that was almost recognition. Yes, Ollivander said, softly. Yes, that is, curious. Very curious. He looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses, an echo of Dumbledore's, 5 noted, though the eyes behind them were nothing alike. That wand's brother, Ollivander said, gave you your scar. I know, Harry said. He was still looking at the wand. And now it chose me. Indeed. That means something, Harry said. It means, Ollivander said, with the quiet certainty of someone who knew his subject better than anyone alive, that the universe has opinions, Mr. Potter. And they are not always the ones powerful men would prefer. Harry looked up at him. A genuine smile, the full one, unguarded, rare outside the academy. I like that, he said. I rather thought you might, Ollivander said. Platform 9 3/4 on September 1st was a specific kind of madness that 5 observed with the analytical detachment of someone who had seen the fall of civilizations but had not previously witnessed the complete logistical chaos of several hundred children, their families, their owls, and their considerably overladen trolleys attempting to board the same train. Everyone came. This was not the original plan. 5 had arranged to see Harry to the barrier, exchange information about communication protocols, review the in-school mission parameters. The original plan did not account for Klaus deciding he needed to come for the vibes, or Diego coming because Klaus was coming and Diego wasn't leaving Klaus unsupervised anywhere with this many emotional people. Or Allison, who had been to Platform 9 3/4 once in 1987 during a commission mission and declared it architecturally fascinating. Or Luther, who said nothing except I'm coming in a tone that ended the conversation. Or Vanya, who had made food for the train journey and didn't explain why she needed to come to give it. So they all came. Harry walked through the barrier and stopped on the platform and stood in the noise and steam of the Hogwarts Express, a scarlet engine that was objectively magnificent, 5 would admit, not that he was moved by trains, and took a breath. The magic in the air here was different. Denser, older, layered. It pressed against Harry's own signature with a kind of welcome that registered on 5's temporal sensor as a resonance pattern. Harry felt it. 5 could see it in the way he stood. It's incredible, Harry said, not loudly, not performatively. Just accurate. Yeah, Diego said, which was more than he said about most things. Klaus was already talking to a ghost, not metaphorically, but actually, a translucent and somewhat pearlescent man in Elizabethan costume who appeared to be delighted to find someone who could hear him. Allison had found someone she vaguely knew, a Muggle actress with a witch daughter, and was managing the social intersection with the ease of breathing. Luther was watching the crowd with the mild security detail attention he brought to most public spaces. Vanya stood next to Harry and pressed a cloth bag into his hands, the food for the journey, sandwiches and fruit and something wrapped in paper that smelled like the good biscuits she made when she was being kind. Come home at Christmas, she said. Obviously, Harry said. And right. The owl system works. Diego figured out how to respond to it. I know. And if anything, Vanya. Harry looked at her. I'll be fine. I know what I'm doing. I know you do, she said. That's not why I want you to write. Harry looked at her for a moment, and then he did something he rarely did with anyone except very rarely with 5, he hugged her. Quick, brief, unannounced. Vanya's arms came around him immediately, and the hug lasted about 4 seconds, and when Harry stepped back his expression was the one he wore when something had gone somewhere it mattered. Christmas, he said. Christmas, she agreed. 5 had been standing slightly apart from all of this, which was his natural habitat in most emotional situations. Harry came to him last, and they stood facing each other on the platform with the noise and steam around them. You know the in-school parameters, 5 said. Yes. The communication protocols. Yes. The priority targets for the Alliance Network, McGonagall, Pomfrey, any student who shows independent skepticism about institutional authority. Yes, 5. And the evidence package is memorized, Harry said. All of it. The Horcrux extraction framework, the cross-timeline documentation outline, the McGonagall observation data, the Fudge meeting transcript. He held Five's gaze. I have everything. Good. Five paused. He was not someone who added things. He calculated what was necessary and said precisely that. Right now, he found himself standing on a train platform watching an 11-year-old he had found in a cupboard 6 years ago prepare to walk into the most significant phase of the operation they had built together, and there were things that weren't calculable. Harry, he said. I know, Harry said. I haven't said anything yet. You don't have to, Harry said. He pushed his glasses up his nose. He looked exactly like himself, a feat that required more than it appeared to. I'll be back at Christmas. And I'll write. And if anything significant happens I'll contact you immediately. He paused. And I'm going to be fine. And I know that I know. Five looked at him. Yes, he said. You do. They didn't hug. That wasn't what they were. But Five put his hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, once, and Harry stood straight under it, and that was sufficient and complete. Harry picked up his trunk, walked down the platform, found a compartment, and sat down. Five watched the train leave. Diego appeared beside him. You okay? Don't ask me that. Okay. A pause. He's going to be extraordinary in there. Obviously, Five said. The train rounded the bend in the track and was gone. The Hogwarts sorting was not something Harry had prepared a performance for, because performance was not his mode. He sat in the great hall, which was, genuinely, astonishing, the enchanted ceiling a perfect reflection of the clouded autumn sky outside, and looked at it with the same cartographic attention he gave everything, and waited. The sorting hat was placed on his head. There was a pause. The hat, in every branch Five had researched, took between 2 and 7 minutes with Harry, debating the relative merits of 4 houses and the specific question of Slytherin. In this branch, the conversation was different because Harry was different, and what the hat found when it settled on his head was not an uncertain 11-year-old but something considerably more complicated. Well, the hat said, inside his head. You're not what I expected. I get that a lot, Harry thought back. Gryffindor would take you instantly. Bravery, yes, certainly. Loyalty. The willingness to fight. A pause. But you're not reckless. You're not brave in the way Gryffindors are typically brave, running toward danger. You calculate it first. Yes. Ravenclaw. Clearly. The intellect is extraordinary. The analytical mind. The sheer breadth of knowledge you're carrying for 11. My family are good teachers. Slytherin would argue for the ambition. The long game. The willingness to work toward a goal through any necessary means. I'm building a case across multiple timelines to expose a corrupt institution, Harry thought. Is that ambitious enough? The hat was quiet for a moment in the specific way of something recalibrating. And what do you want? Not tactically. What do you want? Harry thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything, without performing the answer. I want to learn. I want to understand the world I'm part of. I want to fix what was done wrong and make sure it can't be done again. A pause. I want my family to be proud of me. Not because of what I did. Because of who I am. Gryffindor, the hat said, with the certainty of something that has found what it was looking for. Not for the bravery. For the honesty. Gryffindors are honest, Potter. Painfully, sometimes. Yours is going to cause a great deal of trouble. Good, Harry thought. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry walked to it without performing either modesty or triumph, just sat down in an available seat with the ease of someone who had been making himself at home in difficult spaces since he was 5 years old. The girl who had sat next to him on the train, Hermione Granger, bushy hair, the most thorough pre-reading of Hogwarts, a history he had ever encountered, materialized 2 seats away with the expression of someone who had also been sorted and had also been satisfied with the outcome, and she immediately asked him if he'd found the ceiling impressive because she'd read that it was bewitched by Rowena Ravenclaw's original working and she'd been trying to identify the specific charm family involved. Harry looked at her. He looked at the ceiling. The charm family is derived from the Celum series. They're related to the weather monitoring spells that early wizarding communities developed around 950 CE. The same family was used in medieval observatory towers, which is interesting because Ravenclaw's known research was primarily in knowledge preservation rather than elemental magic. He paused. How far into Hogwarts, a history did you get? Hermione stared at him. Cover to cover, she said. Twice. What did you think about the section on the founder's original intent versus the current curriculum? Because I thought it glossed significantly over the period between 1100 and 1400, it does, Hermione said, with the energy of someone who has found a specific relief. The gap in the record around the introduction of the house system is almost certainly deliberate, based on the footnotes referencing restricted archive material. The restricted archives are accessible with a staff signature, Harry said. I intend to get one before October. Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone reassessing their entire previous understanding of what this year would look like. How? She said. McGonagall, Harry said. She values academic initiative. I have 3 lines of inquiry she'll find genuinely interesting enough to authorize access. He paused. Want to work on it together? Hermione processed this for approximately 2 seconds. Yes, she said firmly. On Harry's other side, a red-haired boy with freckles, Ron Weasley, 6 brothers, chess prodigy, whose family 5 had identified as among the most genuinely decent in the magical world, leaned over and said, Did you just convince her to help you break into the restricted archives before the first terms even started? The signature makes it technically not breaking in, Harry said. Ron considered this. I'm Ron Weasley, he said. Harry Potter. Yeah, I know. Ron was refreshingly unbothered by this fact. Is it true you know how to play poker? Harry looked at him. Klaus taught me. Who's Klaus? My brother. Harry paused. He cheats. I had to learn not to just to keep up. Ron's face arranged itself into the expression of someone who has found their new best friend. I play chess, he said. I'll teach you if you teach me poker. Deal, Harry said. The feast materialized on the tables. McGonagall's classroom was on the first floor, Transfiguration Corridor, and she was exactly as Harry had expected from 4 years of research files and 2 years of temporal observation data, precise, formal, exacting, with the specific quality of someone who had been containing their own doubt for a very long time and had developed extraordinary posture as a result. She turned a desk into a pig on the first day, as apparently she always did, and back again, and regarded the class with the measuring attention of someone who would remember everything she saw here and make judgments accordingly. Harry was in the 3rd row with Ron and Hermione. The class ran through theoretical introduction, the principles of transfiguration, the ethical framework, the dangers. McGonagall moved through it with crisp authority and zero tolerance for inattention, which Harry found restful. He took notes. He asked 3 questions that McGonagall answered with visible, if carefully managed, interest. After class, he stayed. McGonagall was reorganizing her papers at the front desk with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 35 years and had a system. She looked up when she registered he was still there. Mr. Potter, she said. Professor. He approached the desk with the directness he'd learned from 5, not aggressive, not tentative, just the simple momentum of someone who knew why they were in a room. I want to ask you something. McGonagall set down her papers. Then ask. I know you were watching Godric's Hollow on the morning of November 1st, 1981, Harry said. I know you were there before Professor Dumbledore arrived. McGonagall went very still. Harry waited. How, she said, in a voice that was carefully level, do you know that? I have access to temporal observation records, Harry said. I've spent 6 years building a case. Not just about what happened to my parents. About what happened to me, and why, and who decided it. He held her gaze. I know you had doubts. I know you were watching him, not the house. I know you wrote a letter to Dumbledore the following week about the Dursleys, expressing concern about their suitability. McGonagall was absolutely still. That letter was private correspondence. Commissioned temporal archives aren't constrained by the privacy of the original documentation, Harry said, simply, without apology. Professor. I'm not here to attack you. I'm here because I think you've been sitting with something uncomfortable for 10 years and you haven't had anyone give you permission to trust it. A long silence. You're 11, McGonagall said. Yes, Harry agreed. You're telling me you've built a case, she said. Against Albus Dumbledore. A cross-timeline evidentiary case with temporal records, witness accounts, and physical evidence. Yes. He paused. I'm going to expose what he did. I'm going to do it in a way that can't be dismissed or contextualized away. And when that happens, the most important voices are going to be the ones from inside, people who were close to him, people who were trusted, people whose doubt will carry weight with the Wisengamot. McGonagall looked at him for a very long time. The specific attention of someone who is running everything they know against everything they are being told and finding, with something between relief and terror, that they align. You have documentation, she said. Extensive. Of what specifically? The Pettigrew recommendation. The 1982 diagnostic that confirmed the Horcrux presence. The 1987 meeting with Fudge. The suppression of my placement options post-1981. The deliberate gap in the historical record around the prophecy. He paused. And the theoretical framework for Horcrux extraction, which I'd like Madame Pomfrey to review. McGonagall sat down. The Horcrux, she said quietly, and 5 had been right, she knew the word, she knew what it meant, and her face in this moment was not the face of someone learning something new but the face of someone having the worst of their suspicions confirmed. He never had it removed, Harry said. He needed it in place. McGonagall's jaw was tight. Mr. Potter, Harry, he said. She looked at him. Harry. What you are describing is, she stopped. Started again. The implications of what you're describing would fundamentally alter the trust of an institution and a community that is still healing from a war. Yes, Harry said. I know. I've thought about it for years. He held her gaze steadily. But a community that is healing on a false foundation isn't actually healing. It's just postponing a worse collapse. He paused. The people who died in that war deserve the truth of what was done in their names. McGonagall was very quiet. Outside the window, the Scottish sky was moving rapidly toward evening, cloud banks coming in from the west, the grounds below going dark green and grey. Harry stood in the empty classroom in his school robes and waited, because waiting was something he was very good at, and because some things needed the space to arrive at their own speed. Show me the documentation, McGonagall said finally. Her voice was the voice of someone who has made a decision they will not unmake. Everything you have. I want to see it. I'll have it to you by the end of the week, Harry said. And Professor, he paused. Thank you for sitting outside that house all day. It mattered, even if it didn't change anything at the time. It meant someone was watching and it mattered. McGonagall looked at him, and her expression was the one he had seen in 2 years of temporal observation files, the complicated, layered expression of someone who loves and doubts the same thing simultaneously and has never had anyone see that clearly before. Go to dinner, Mr. Potter, she said, quietly. And, welcome to Hogwarts. Harry picked up his bag. Thank you, Professor, he said, and left. In the corridor outside, the castle settled around him, stone and moving staircases and portraits with opinions, ancient and warm and strange and exactly as extraordinary as the enchanted ceiling had suggested it would be. His magic moved through it easy and bright, tasting the old magic in the walls, finding the resonances, threading itself into the long conversation the castle had been having with the magic of every student who had ever passed through. Hogwarts recognized him. He recognized it back. He pulled out his quill and the parchment he always kept ready, and wrote to 5 as he walked. First day. McGonagall is on board. We'll have documentation to her by Friday. Sorted into Gryffindor. Before you say anything, the Hat agreed with your analysis about the honesty. Found Hermione Granger, she's exceptional. Ron Weasley plays chess. The castle is incredible. Dumbledore looked at me like a puzzle he's determined to solve. Let him. Everything is in motion. He folded it. At the end of the corridor, an owl was sitting on a windowsill as if it had been waiting. Harry held up the letter. The owl took it without ceremony and was gone into the Scottish evening. Down in the great hall, the feast was ongoing, his friends waiting for him at the long table, the ceiling perfectly reflecting the autumn stars. Harry went to dinner. Chapter 5, Every timeline bleeds. The Horcrux removal happened on a Wednesday in November, which was not how Harry had imagined it but was, in retrospect, exactly the kind of thing that happened when you combined Five's planning with Madame Pomfrey's professional efficiency and McGonagall's logistical precision. Pomfrey had taken 4 days with the theoretical framework Harry had delivered. The extraction model 5 had built over 3 years of research, memorized and reproduced in Harry's careful handwriting across 11 pages of parchment. She had read it 3 times, made 12 pages of her own notes, summoned 3 reference texts from the restricted medical archive, cross-referenced the extraction theory against every known case of soul fragment removal in the last 2 centuries, and then she had appeared in McGonagall's office on a Sunday evening with her notes under her arm and said, simply, "It'll work. It's going to hurt. I want to do it as soon as possible because the longer it remains the more integrated it becomes, and we're already working against a decade of integration." McGonagall had looked at Pomfrey's notes. Then at Harry, who was sitting in the chair across from her desk where he had been doing his transfiguration homework. "Your choice," McGonagall said. "Wednesday," Harry said. "After lessons." So Wednesday it was. The hospital wing in the afternoon was empty and clean and smelled of potions, ingredients and the specific antiseptic quality of a space that took healing seriously. Pomfrey had prepared for 3 hours. Harry could see the evidence of it in the arranged tools, the specific configuration of magical implements on the side table, the ward patterns she'd laid into the floor that glowed faintly when he stepped inside. McGonagall was there. She'd insisted, and Harry hadn't argued. Pomfrey looked at Harry with the frank professional attention of a healer who had treated 30 years of accidents and illnesses and was entirely undaunted by complexity. "I need you to understand what this is going to feel like," she said. "I'm going to be separating a foreign entity from your nervous system. The scar tissue and surrounding area will behave as though it's being," she chose her word carefully, "disentangled. There will be pain. There will be a brief period of what feels like absence, because the fragment has been part of your energy signature for 10 years and its removal will leave a gap that your own magic will fill, but there's a moment in between." She held his gaze. "Are you ready?" Harry sat on the hospital bed and took off his glasses and held them in his hands and said, "Yes." "Lie back." He lay back. The procedure took 40 minutes. It was, as advertised, not comfortable. The disentanglement process felt exactly as Pomfrey had described, not like cutting, more like the careful unthreading of something that had learned to masquerade as part of the fabric. There were stages to it, first a pressure, then a pulling sensation that was specific and deep, then a period of, Harry searched for the word later, writing to 5, loudness, not sound but the sensation of something that had been speaking at low volume directly into his awareness for as long as he could remember, suddenly getting very present and then stopping. The stopping was the worst part. Not because it hurt more, but because the absence was so complete and so sudden that his whole system startled at it, like a room going from noise to silence so absolute you could hear your own blood. Then his own magic moved into the gap. He had felt his magic before, responsive, warm, living, but he had never felt it without the low-grade interference of the fragment running alongside it, and the difference was extraordinary. It was like he'd been hearing music through a wall for 10 years and had now stepped into the room where it was actually playing. He sat up. Pomfrey caught his arm. Slowly. "I'm fine," Harry said, and meant it more completely than he had ever meant it before. He put his glasses back on. He looked at his hands. Same hands. The scar on his forehead felt different, the lightning bolt shape was still there, it would always be there, but the pressure behind it was gone, and the absence of it was its own kind of information. "The fragment," he said. Pomfrey held up a sealed vial. Inside it, something dark moved sluggishly, formless, deeply unpleasant to look at directly. "Can you preserve it?" Harry said. "Exactly as it is?" "Indefinitely, in the right medium," Pomfrey said. She was watching him with the focused attention of a healer making ongoing assessments. "Why?" "It's evidence," Harry said. "It proves he knew. The diagnostic that identified it was run in 1982 and suppressed. If this exists and can be examined by a competent magical forensic specialist, the diagnostic record becomes irrefutable." He looked at the vial. "That vial is the single most compelling piece of physical evidence we have." McGonagall, who had been standing near the door with her arms folded and the careful expression of someone managing a significant emotional response through structural posture, said quietly, "He knew it was there the whole time." "Yes," Harry said. "And he let it stay." "Yes." The room was quiet. Pomfrey sealed the vial with a complex three-layer preservation charm and placed it in a warded case, and the movement was precise and deliberate, a healer handling evidence, and Harry watched her do it and felt the weight of the last 6 years of work consolidating into something singular and clear. "We're going to need the Wizengamot," he said. "Not petitioned. Formally convened. With the full evidentiary record submitted under cross-timeline temporal admission, which McGonagall's signature can authorize under the Magical Evidence Protocols for, Section 42 of the Wizengamot's Extraordinary Examination Provisions," McGonagall said. "I'm familiar with it. I've been reviewing the legal framework since you first brought documentation to me." She looked at him steadily. "Harry. What's your timeline?" "End of year," Harry said. "Before Voldemort makes his move. We know he's in the castle. I've identified the vessel, it's one of the professors." He paused. "Professor Quirrell. Dumbledore knows. He's let it proceed because it fits the plan. Voldemort comes back, the war recommences, I go to face him having been prepared to die willingly." His voice was flat, factual, the information delivered without self-pity because self-pity had never been available to him and also because there was work to do. "We disrupt that by making the exposure before the Voldemort situation resolves. We take the plan off the table. No willing sacrifice. No weapon." He paused. "And Voldemort becomes a straightforward problem rather than a narrative one." McGonagall and Pomfrey looked at each other. "A straightforward problem," Pomfrey repeated. "Relatively," Harry said. "I didn't say simple. I said straightforward." McGonagall almost smiled. It was the specific almost smile she had when something he said reflected back at her with more clarity than she expected. "The documentation," she said. "How much do you currently have assembled here?" "What I've delivered to you, plus what's in my room." He paused. "The complete record, the full cross-timeline package, is with 5. My guardian. He has the master files. When we move, he'll bring them through." "Your guardian is going to bring cross-timeline temporal evidence files into the Wizengamot," McGonagall said. "Yes. Is that going to be a problem?" "It's going to be unprecedented," McGonagall said. "Most useful things are," Harry said. 5 received Harry's letter on a Thursday, 3 weeks into November. He had been receiving Harry's letters with the regularity of a field operative filing reports, because that was partly what they were, brief, precise, informational, occasionally containing observations that recalibrated 5's analysis in ways that required him to update 3 separate tracking documents. Harry wrote to Ron and Hermione differently, presumably, 5 had no data on that, and no particular interest in it. His letters to 5 were what field letters had always been: here is what I found, here is what it means, here is the next move. This one was different. The extraction is complete. Pomfrey preserved the fragment, it's exactly what you theorized. The integration gap is already filling. I feel, cleaner is the word. I feel cleaner. McGonagall is fully committed. She's been reviewing the Wisengamot admissibility framework. She'll file the Section 42 petition. I need the master documentation package by mid-December. A pause in the writing, visible in a slight change in the pressure of the ink. I also need you to start the cross-timeline simultaneous activation. The anchor points we identified, we need people at each one ready to move when we move here. Can you do it by December? 5 put the letter down. He looked at his whiteboard, which covered an entire wall of his office and was now covered in the accumulated cartography of 6 years of investigation, timelines and names and evidence connections and temporal coordinates and the developing activation network across 7 branches. He looked at it the way he looked at complex problems, finding the shape beneath the detail, the architecture beneath the evidence. December was aggressive. December was 43 days from now. He picked up his pen and began writing the logistics plan. It took 4 hours and 2 pots of coffee and 1 conversation with Diego that turned into an argument about methodology and then turned back into a productive logistics conversation in the way that all his conversations with Diego did, following the reliable arc from friction to utility. The cross-timeline activation requires a physical anchor in each branch, 5 said, pointing at the relevant section of the whiteboard. Someone on the ground who can receive the simultaneous trigger signal and act on it at the designated moment. In our timeline, that's McGonagall and Pomfrey from inside and the master documentation delivered to the Wisengamot through an independent advocate. What's an independent advocate in the magical world? Diego asked. Someone who isn't me, because I don't exist in their legal framework. 5 paused. Yet. He had been thinking about this. I can make myself exist in it. The Commission has cross-dimensional legal standing in approximately 40 recognized governance systems. I can invoke that standing before the Wisengamot as an external witness and temporal evidence custodian. Diego looked at the whiteboard. And the other branches? The activation points are the same individuals in slightly different configurations. McGonagall is in every branch. Pomfrey is in every branch. The divergences affect their positioning relative to Dumbledore. In some branches, McGonagall is closer to him, more integrated into the plan without knowing it. In those cases, the trigger has to be the documentation itself rather than a prepared witness. The documentation arriving is the trigger? Yes. Delivered simultaneously. The temporal anchor mechanism I've been developing can route delivery to 7 branches at the same moment. Once the documents land, once the evidence is in the hands of the relevant authorities in every branch, Dumbledore has nowhere to retreat to. There's no timeline where he can say let me go manage this elsewhere because they all go at once. Diego was quiet for a moment. He looked at the whiteboard, at the breadth of the work mapped on it, at the 6 years of careful construction leading to this specific mechanism. You built this backwards, he said. You started with what the ending needed and built the whole structure to produce it. Yes, 5 said. Diego paused. That's exactly what Harry does. I know. 5 looked at the whiteboard. He learned it from somewhere. Diego sat back. What's the risk? The real one, not the procedural one. 5 considered the question with the honest attention it deserved. Diego always asked for the real risk, which was part of why 5 found him genuinely useful in planning conversations despite the arguments. Dumbledore responds before we're ready, he said. He's been in that castle for 60 years. He knows every pressure point in the system. The moment he understands what's happening, he will move to discredit the documentation, isolate the witnesses, and reframe the narrative. 5 paused. He won't do it maliciously. He'll do it because he genuinely believes the plan matters more than the truth about it. That makes him more dangerous, not less, because he'll be persuasive. How do we stop that? Speed, 5 said. And scale. He can't reframe 7 timelines simultaneously. He can manage one crisis at a time. We don't give him that. He put down the pen. We give him everything at once. Diego nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Physical anchor support in the cross-timeline jumps. I can navigate the branches alone, but having a second person at each anchor point reduces the risk of temporal destabilization during simultaneous activation. 5 looked at him. I need you in the branches with me when we set the anchors. Diego was quiet for a moment. Cross-timeline jumping was not his preferred environment. He had a natural spatial orientation that temporal displacement challenged in ways that were physically uncomfortable. But 5 watched him run it through his personal calculus, the specific equation of discomfort versus what matters, and arrive at the answer it always produced. When do we start? Diego said. Tomorrow, 5 said. We have 43 days. Hogwarts in November was cold in the specific way of Scottish stone buildings that are also several hundred years old, not aggressively cold, but fundamentally cold, the kind that lived in the walls and could be warmed against but not eliminated. Harry found he didn't mind it. He had spent enough time in 5's lab, which was also fundamentally cold, to have developed a relationship with cold spaces that was essentially neutral. He moved through the first months of Hogwarts the way he moved through everything, systematically, without performance, taking what was genuinely interesting and learning it properly and filing what was merely required and learning that efficiently. He was ahead in most subjects because of course he was, 6 years of 5's research material and Diego's physical training and Alison's social instruction and Vanya's musical discipline and Klaus's everything and Luther's structural thinking had produced someone who arrived at Hogwarts with a preparation level that had no precedent in the curriculum's usual intake population. But the genuinely interesting things were genuinely interesting, and he let them be. Transfiguration was architecturally beautiful in a way that 5's temporal mechanics were architecturally beautiful, the logic of transformation, the conservation principles, the elegant framework of what could change and what couldn't and the theory of why. Charms operated on probability in a way that resonated with his own magic's native language. Defense against the dark arts was being taught badly. Quirrell's stutter and nervous energy were the performance of a man with something else occupying significant internal space, and Harry identified this in the first week and maintained a careful neutral distance from the class that was polite enough not to draw attention and cautious enough not to invite proximity. He didn't confront Quirrell. He didn't need to. The situation would resolve when the exposure resolved. Voldemort's vessel would be rendered moot the moment the plan Voldemort was supporting collapsed. He focused on building his network. Hermione was not someone he had to build toward, she arrived already. A force and collaboration with her was less recruitment and more alliance between adjacent powers. She was the most rigorous empiricist he had met outside of 5, with a moral framework that was both inflexible and correct in the specific combination that produced someone worth trusting completely. He told her what he was doing in stages, not because he didn't trust her, but because the stages were real and the full picture needed context to land properly. By November he had given her the complete overview. She had sat with it for 40 minutes, cross-referencing it against her own observations and reading, and then said, the Wisingamot petition under Section 42 requires a minimum of 3 independent corroborating witnesses in addition to the primary evidence submission. You have McGonagall and Pomfrey. Who's third? Harry had looked at her. I was thinking you. Hermione had been very still for a moment. Then, I'm 11. The provision doesn't have an age requirement. It has a credibility requirement. The criterion is whether the witness has direct knowledge of the matter. He paused. You read the documentation I gave you. You verified it against independent sources. You have now directly observed Quirrell's behavior in a way that corroborates the Voldemort vessel hypothesis. He held her gaze. You have direct knowledge. And you're Hermione Granger. Nobody who encounters you in a formal examination context is going to dismiss your testimony. Hermione processed this. Ron, she said. Support, not witness. He doesn't have direct knowledge of the documentation in the same way. Harry paused. But Ron's family is significant in the wizarding world. His father works at the ministry. His mother is one of the most respected witches of her generation. Their implicit support, if we have it, affects how the broader community receives the exposure. You've thought about this very carefully, Hermione said. For 6 years, Harry said. Right. She straightened her notes. Okay. I'll be the third witness. What do I need to do? Ron, for his part, took the whole thing with the equanimity of someone whose family had been on the right side of every conflict in living memory and was therefore somewhat unsurprised to find themselves on the right side of this one. He listened to the full account on a Sunday afternoon in the corner of the common room while the fire burned and Hermione maintained a subtle privacy charm around their chairs, and he said, at the end of it, so Dumbledore basically engineered your whole life to use you as a weapon. Yes, Harry said. And he knew there was a bit of Voldemort in your head and never told you or removed it. Until last Wednesday, yes. And you're going to expose the whole thing in front of the Wizengamot before Christmas. That's the plan. Ron was quiet for a moment. My dad, he said slowly, has been saying for years that something about the aftermath of the war felt wrong. Not in a suspicious way, just off. Like something in the official account didn't add up. He looked at Harry. He's going to want to know about this. I know, Harry said. Can you reach him before December? Without Dumbledore knowing you've reached out? Dad talks to Mum about ministry stuff all the time and Dumbledore doesn't monitor their fireplace, Ron said. Yeah. I can do it by owl if I'm careful about what I say. Tell him a friend has information about the Potter case, Harry said. Specifically the original placement decision and the 1982 diagnostic. He'll know what the diagnostic means if he's been following the case at all. Ron looked at him with the expression he wore when he was recalibrating his sense of the situation, which was a look Harry had come to recognize as Ron at his most clear. You know, Ron said, when I found out I was going to school with Harry Potter, I thought it was going to be weird. Famous person, lightning bolt scar, whole thing. And? Harry said. It's definitely weird, Ron said. Just not that kind. Harry almost laughed. Is that okay? It's great, Ron said simply. Better, actually. Much better. December arrived with snow on the grounds and a restless energy in the castle that Harry attributed partly to the season and partly to the fact that the castle itself seemed to have an awareness, old stone and old magic, sensing the gathering pressure of what was being assembled within it. The moving staircases changed direction more than usual. The portraits talked in lower voices. The library, which Harry and Hermione had made, by this point, something close to a second common room, felt different in the evenings, more alert, as if the books were listening. He wrote to 5 on the 1st of December, we're ready. Set the simultaneous activation for December 20th. The petition should land on the 19th, McGonagall is filing it. The Wizengamot Extraordinary Session is already authorized under the Section 42 provision. The witnesses are prepared. The physical evidence is secured. We need the master documentation at the session itself. A pause. Tell me the cross-timeline anchors are set. 5's response came back in 2 days, which was fast for Owl Post. Anchors are set in all 7 branches. Diego held them while I ran the simultaneous calibration, took 4 passes and one very unpleasant destabilization event in branch 4 that we resolved without permanent damage. The activation mechanism is tested. On December 20th, every branch receives the documentation at the same moment. 23 seconds of window, I'll need you at the Wizengamot session to function as the local anchor point. Your signature stabilizes the cross-branch delivery because you're the fixed point. Without you in the room, the simultaneous mechanism loses coherence. And then, at the bottom, in handwriting that was slightly different from 5's usual precision, slightly faster, the Horcrux is gone. The math is cleaner now. Everything is pointing in the right direction. 5. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in the inner pocket of his robes where he kept things that mattered. Dumbledore summoned him on December 10th. Harry had been expecting this. The headmaster's office was at the top of the spiral staircase behind the stone gargoyle, and it was, like Dumbledore himself, simultaneously impressive and carefully worn: bookshelves, silver instruments doing incomprehensible things, portraits of previous headmasters, a large bird that was either asleep or possibly on fire. Fawkes, Harry knew. The phoenix whose feather was in his wand. Dumbledore was at his desk, and he looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses with the extraordinary gaze that had not changed since August, warm, assessing, carrying the specific intelligence of someone who had been revising their understanding of a situation for 4 months. "Sit down, Harry," he said. Harry sat. "How are you finding Hogwarts?" Dumbledore asked, in the tone that was both genuinely interested and also the opening of something else. "Excellent, thank you," Harry said. "And your family? You've been corresponding regularly?" "Every week," Harry said. "Good." Dumbledore folded his hands on his desk. "Harry, I want to speak with you honestly." "Good," Harry said. "I'd appreciate that." A fractional pause. "I know that you've been building something. Since September. I know you've been in conversation with Professor McGonagall about historical matters. I know you've visited the hospital wing for what Madame Pomfrey has recorded as a routine medical procedure." He met Harry's gaze steadily. "I know more than you might expect." "Yes," Harry said. "You usually do." "I want you to understand," Dumbledore said, "that everything I have done, everything, has been in service of the same goal. Protecting this world. Protecting the people in it. Protecting," a brief pause, "you." "I know you believe that," Harry said. "It's true," Dumbledore said. "I want you to hear that before anything else. It is genuinely true." Harry looked at him. At the warm blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses, at the face that had been carrying a terrible weight for 30 years with what looked like grace and was actually, Harry now understood, the specific practiced stillness of someone who had learned to live inside a moral compromise so completely that the compromise felt like integrity. "I know it's true," Harry said. "That's the hardest part of this. You love the people you sacrificed. You carried the grief of every decision. You never stopped believing it was necessary." He paused. "And it was still wrong." Dumbledore was quiet. "You knew about the Horcrux in 1982, Harry said. You commissioned the diagnostic that found it and then you suppressed the results and you never had it removed because you needed it there. Because the plan required me to carry it until the right moment, and the right moment was when I walked willingly into death." He held Dumbledore's gaze without heat, without performance. "Just fact, clearly stated. You engineered my parents' death by making sure the secret keeper was compromised. You took a terrified 1-year-old and put him in a house with people who hated him because a frightened, grateful, lonely child was easier to prepare for sacrifice than a loved and confident one. And you did all of this with the genuine belief that you were the only person capable of seeing the full picture and making the right call." Dumbledore's face did the thing it had done in August, the barely controlled rapid assessment, the recovery, the return to warmth that was now threaded with something else. He was not defensive. He was, and this was what was almost unbearable about him, he was listening. He was receiving every word with the full attention of someone who had never been spoken to like this before and was finding, against his will, that it was reaching something. "The Horcrux is removed," Harry said. "The evidence is documented. The witnesses are prepared. The petition has been filed. On December 20th, the Wizengamot is going to see everything." Silence. "You could stop it," Harry said. "You have enough influence. If you moved today, you could discredit the witnesses, challenge the temporal admission, use every relationship you've built over 60 years to prevent this from landing." He paused. "I know that. And you know I know that. Then why," Dumbledore said, very quietly, "are you telling me?" Harry looked at him. Because I don't want to win by going around you, he said. I want you to understand what you did. Clearly. Without the architecture of justification you've built around it. He held the old man's gaze. The people who died in the war, my parents, all of them, they made choices. They chose to fight. They chose the risk. You took that from me. You decided what I would choose before I existed as someone who could choose. That's not protection. That's ownership. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, snow was falling on the Hogwarts grounds, slow and steady, the kind that settles and stays. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. And 5 had been right, and Harry had known 5 was right. The extraordinary thing was not the coldness or the calculation but the fact that underneath it all the old man was present in this moment, genuinely present, receiving it, and the thing moving in his face was not anger and not strategy but something much older and more fundamental. Something that looked like recognition. I did own you, Dumbledore said. His voice was very quiet. I told myself it was guardianship. Stewardship. A long pause. It was ownership. Harry said nothing. He let the words exist in the room without response, because sometimes the right thing was not to fill the space. I can't undo it, Dumbledore said. No, Harry agreed. What I can do, Dumbledore stopped. His hands were very still on his desk, the ancient rings and the careful grooming and the whole careful construction of him, and underneath it something that was simply an old man who had run a terrible calculation and was only now seeing the full output. What would you have me do? Harry had thought about this question for a long time. Tell the truth, he said. Not in the way you've been telling it, where the necessary parts get left out and the full picture is never available. The actual truth. In front of the Wizengamot. Your account, from the beginning. He paused. Not because it changes the evidence. It won't. But because the people who trusted you deserve to hear it from you. That would destroy everything I've built, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. It would. But you built it on false ground, and what you built on false ground belongs to the false ground. He stood up. I'm not going to pretend it isn't going to be hard. It's going to be very hard. For everyone. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. But hard and wrong aren't the same thing. He picked up his bag. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry stopped. The boy you might have been, Dumbledore said quietly, in the cupboard under those stairs. The one he stopped. The one I made. I am sorrier for that than I have language to express. Harry looked at him. He thought about Branch 2 Harry in the back corner of the classroom, folded hands and wrong prescription glasses and compressed magic. He thought about October 30th, 1981, and the lit window and the shape of his father carrying him and his mother's hand on his father's shoulder and Dumbledore at the gate watching with genuine grief and not changing the thing that was coming anyway. I know, Harry said. I believe you. He paused. It doesn't make it not happen. But I believe you. He left. December 15th, and 5 arrived. He came through the temporal fold that Harry had helped him establish at the edge of the Hogwarts grounds during a Hogsmeade visit, a stable anchor point, precisely calculated, designed for single individual transit without the institutional detection that a public arrival would have caused. Harry met him at the tree line at 6 in the morning with 2 coats and a flask of coffee that Vanya had sent in the last package with a note reading for 5, obviously, he's going to need it. 5 stepped through the fold and took the coffee without preamble. He looked around at the snow-covered grounds, at the castle above them, at the pale winter sky. He looked at Harry. You look different, 5 said. The Horcrux is gone, Harry said. That's it, 5 said. He said it with the specific quality of a confirmation of something he'd been waiting to verify in person. Then, McGonagall. Ready. Pomfrey has the physical evidence and the medical testimony. Hermione has her witness statement prepared, she made 5 copies. Ron's father contacted the ministry. Arthur Weasley is going to be at the Wisengamot session. Fudge. McGonagall reached him through official channels. He's read the preliminary documentation and he's conflicted. But Arthur Weasley is going to bring him in fully. Harry paused. And Dumbledore knows. Five looked at him sharply. You told him. Yes. We didn't discuss, I know we didn't discuss it, Harry said. I decided it was right. He deserved to know before it happened. Not as a tactical move. Because it was the honest thing to do. Five was quiet for a moment, looking at Harry with the specific attention that meant he was recalculating. Did it compromise anything? No. He's not going to move against it. I think, Harry paused, looking up at the castle. I think he might come and speak at the session voluntarily. Five processed this. That would be significant. Yes. You think he will? I think he's been waiting for someone to give him permission to stop carrying it alone, Harry said. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just truth. Permission to put it down and let it be seen. He looked at Five. I think that's what yesterday was. Five said nothing for a moment. Then, the cross-timeline anchors activate in 5 days. At 9 a.m. on the 20th, simultaneously across all 7 branches, every designated receiver gets the documentation package. The Wisengamot session is set for 10 a.m. here, which gives the package an hour to process through the institutional system before the session opens. Is everything is set, Five said. The math is complete. Harry looked at him. Five standing in the snow at the tree line of Hogwarts with his commission field coat and his coffee, 11 years after he'd stepped out of a temporal fold and found a 5-year-old in a cupboard and decided, in his specific impulsive non-sentimental way, that leaving was not an option. He looked exactly the same as he always had, the perpetual 13, the flat effect, the deep competence, and also completely different, in the way that people look different when you have 6 years of context and love to read them through, even when the love is the kind that doesn't announce itself. Five, Harry said. Thank you. For all of it. Five looked at him. The morning was quiet around them, snow and grey light and the castle above and the 5 days between them and the end of the thing they'd been building for 6 years. Don't thank me, Five said. Thank me when it's done. I'm thanking you now, Harry said. Because now is when it matters. Five was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You're going to be fine. You know that. I know that. The session is going to work. I know that too. And whatever Dumbledore decides to do, Five. Harry looked at him steadily. I know. I've got it. Five held his gaze. Then he nodded, once, with the specific quality of someone releasing something they've been holding. I'll see you on the 20th, he said. At the Wisengamot. I'll be the one who looks 11, Harry said. You are 11. You know what I mean. Five almost smiled. Almost. Yes, he said. I do. He stepped back through the temporal fold. The fold closed. Harry stood in the snow for a moment alone, looking at the space where Five had been and then at the castle and then at the sky, which was brightening at the horizon into the specific cold clear blue of a winter morning deciding to be good. He went back inside. December 19th was the longest day Harry could remember since the ones in Brussels at age 5, which had been long in a different way, the length of shock, of adjustment, of something new arriving all at once. This was the length of readiness, of everything prepared and nothing left to do but the thing itself. He went to classes. He ate at the Gryffindor table. He played chess with Ron, who beat him twice and lost once and suggested the loss was a gift, which Harry disputed with evidence. He sat in the library with Hermione, who was reviewing her witness statement with the focus of someone who was going to be called upon to be extraordinary in public and intended to be exactly that. The castle was itself around them, old and vast and aware in its particular way, the portraits quiet for once, the magic in the walls steady. At dinner, Dumbledore sat at the head table and ate with the composed equanimity he always displayed in public, and Harry watched him from the Gryffindor table with the awareness that tomorrow Dumbledore might either destroy everything or complete it, and he had no certain knowledge of which it would be, and he had made his peace with not knowing. He had done what was possible to do. The rest was not his to control. After dinner, he went up to the dormitory, and he sat on his bed, and he wrote one letter. Tomorrow. The anchors activate at 9 a.m. across all branches. The session opens at 10. McGonagall has the petition. Pomfrey has the evidence. Hermione and Arthur Weasley are ready. I'll be the anchor point. The documentation lands everywhere at once, and then whatever happens, happens. He paused, then wrote, whatever happens, the version of Harry in every other branch gets the information tomorrow. Every one of them. And whatever they do with it is their choice. That's what this was always about. Not me winning. Every version of us getting to choose. Another pause. See you tomorrow. Tell everyone I'm ready. H. He sealed it. He gave it to the owl that had been waiting on his windowsill for 3 days in the patient way of owls who understood their assignment. It was gone into the dark before he'd finished watching it go. He lay back and looked at the ceiling and listened to Ron's breathing even out into sleep across the dormitory, and Neville turning over with a soft sound, and the snow on the window, and the castle breathing around him with its old magic and its old stones and the extraordinary, particular feeling of a place that had held people for centuries and would hold them for centuries more. He was ready. Outside, in 7 timelines simultaneously, the people 5 and Diego had anchored were sitting with sealed packages they didn't know yet contained everything. Sleeping, mostly, at this hour. Each one carrying the specific weight of a thing that hadn't arrived yet. In the morning, it would arrive. In the morning, every timeline would know what had been done in the dark. Harry closed his eyes. He slept. Chapter 6. The boy who chose December 20th arrived the way consequential days always do, without ceremony, without the atmospheric weight you expect, just the grey pre-dawn light coming through the dormitory window and the sound of Ron's alarm going off and Neville knocking his water glass off the nightstand. Ordinary. Relentlessly ordinary, which was itself a kind of mercy. Harry was already awake. He had been awake since 5, which was the hour his body defaulted to when something significant was coming, a habit established in the years of early training sessions with Diego, the years of pre-jump preparation in 5's lab. He lay in the dark and ran through everything, not from anxiety, but from the same deliberate practice that athletes use the morning of something real, the final quiet review before motion begins. The witnesses were prepared. The evidence was secure. The anchors were set. In 4 hours, across 7 timelines simultaneously, everything would move. He got up, dressed without waking the others, and went down to the common room. The fire was low. He sat in front of it and did nothing in particular for an hour, not reviewing, not planning, just existing in the quiet before the day became itself. He had learned this from Vanya, who did it before every significant performance, and from 5, who would have denied doing it but demonstrably did, in the kitchen in the early morning with his coffee and his silence. At 7, Hermione came downstairs. She sat across from him, and she had her witness statement folder under her arm, and her hair was already losing the battle with the morning, and she looked at him with the precise assessment of someone who had been his intellectual equal and closest ally for 4 months. "Ready?" she said. "Yes," Harry said. "You?" "I have been ready since I finished the 3rd revision of my statement," she said. "Which was 3 weeks ago." She paused. "Harry. It's going to work. I know. I'm not saying it to reassure you. I'm saying it because the evidentiary foundation is sound, the procedural filings are correct, and the witness testimony is airtight. I checked everything 4 times. "I know," Harry said. "I trust your checking." Hermione settled back slightly, her version of relaxing, which still looked like most people's version of attentive. After today, she said, what happens? Harry considered the question. The wizarding world has to figure out what it believes about the war, he said. About itself. About who it trusted and why. That's going to take time. There'll be people who can't accept it, who'll say the documentation is fabricated, the temporal evidence is unreliable, that the ends justified it. He paused. And there'll be people who already knew something was wrong and will finally be allowed to say it. He looked at the fire. It's not going to be clean. Exposures never are. But it'll be true, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. It'll be true. Ron came down at 7:30 with his hair at an angle that suggested it had opinions about the morning. He took one look at both of them and said, right, so we're doing the intense fire staring thing. Good, good. He sat down between them. My dad's at the ministry already. Mum sent a Patronus this morning. She says Dad is confident and Fudge is nervous, which is apparently a good sign because when Fudge is nervous he does whatever Arthur Weasley tells him. That's useful, Harry said. I know. Mum also sent breakfast. He produced a paper bag from behind him with the matter-of-fact competence of someone whose family's love was expressed primarily through food. It contained 3 sets of everything, still warm. She says to eat before anything else. Harry took his portion. He ate it, because Molly Weasley's food was not the kind of thing you declined and also because she was right, you ate before anything else. He thought about Vanya's sandwiches in the paper bag on the Brussels jump. The same logic. Different hands. At 8:50, they walked down to McGonagall's office together. The Wisengamot didn't meet at Hogwarts. This was self-evident but worth stating, because the process of getting from Hogwarts to the Ministry of Magic at 9 in the morning on December 20th involved McGonagall, 2 ministry-authorized portkeys, Pomfrey with the sealed evidence case, and the slightly disorienting reality of the British Ministry of Magic's atrium, which was vast and golden and entirely too much for 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. Harry had researched it. He had never been here. The research did not fully prepare you for the specific energy of the place, the depth of the old magic in the foundations, the accumulated weight of decades of wizarding governance, the particular feeling of an institution that was aware of its own significance and had been for a long time. 5 was already there. He was standing near the fountain in the center of the atrium in his commission field coat, Diego beside him, and they were talking to Arthur Weasley, who was a tall, balding, genuinely warm man who looked at his son with the specific expression of a parent who is proud and worried simultaneously and managing both with the cheerful pragmatism of someone who had practice at it. When he saw Harry, Arthur Weasley crossed the atrium in several long strides, extended his hand, and said, Harry. Arthur Weasley. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time. Harry shook his hand. Mr. Weasley. Thank you for being here. Wouldn't miss it, Arthur said simply. I've been at the ministry for 20 years and there are things I've known didn't add up. You've just told me how they fit. He looked at Harry steadily, with the clear eyes of someone who had raised 6 sons and knew how to see a person properly. This is extraordinary work. The documentation is extraordinary. The cross-timeline evidence package, he paused, glancing at 5. When your guardian explained the temporal mechanism, I'll be honest, I had to sit down for a moment. Most people do, 5 said. Yes, I imagine. Arthur looked back at Harry. Fudge is inside. He's received the preliminary materials and he chose his word carefully. Uncomfortable. But Arthur Weasley telling Cornelius Fudge that the evidence is sound and the process is legitimate carries some weight. He'll stay in the room. That's all we need, Harry said. At 9 exactly, Harry felt it. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't something you could see or hear. But he felt it in his temporal signature, in the fixed-point resonance that 5 scans had been mapping for 6 years. A pulse. 7 simultaneous pulses, branching out through the timeline architecture, the documentation packages activating at their anchor points across every branch at precisely the same moment. He had known it would happen. He had not known what it would feel like. It felt like something exhaling. Like a breath that had been held since 1981. Five was looking at him. "It's done," Five said. "I felt it," Harry said. All 7. Simultaneous. Clean delivery. Five checked the small commission device in his hand that monitored temporal activation events. No destabilization. Every branch received. "Then it's everywhere," Harry said. "Everywhere," Five confirmed. Harry nodded. He stood in the ministry atrium in his Hogwarts robes and felt the fact of it settle, all the versions of his story that had been running in parallel, all the branches where a different boy was carrying less information and less agency and less family, and now every one of them had the same documentation, the same evidence, the same truth delivered simultaneously. What they did with it was, as he'd written to Five last night, their choice. But the choice was finally available. He felt that in his chest in a way that was too large and too complete for any word he currently had. Diego appeared beside him and put a hand on his shoulder briefly, the way he did when something mattered and words were insufficient. "Let's go finish it," he said. The Wisingamott's extraordinary session chamber was everything the atrium was not golden, not grand, but dense. Old wood and tiered seating in a semicircle, every surface worn smooth with use, the air carrying the specific weight of the serious decisions that had been made here over centuries. The Wisingamot members, 50-odd witches and wizards in plum-colored robes, filled the tiered seating, and there was a quality of attention in the room that Harry recognized from Alison's descriptions of truly significant rooms, the kind where something everyone feels will be remembered is about to happen. At the front, a large chair. The presenting chair, for the primary witness. Harry took it. He sat down in the ancient, important chair, in his Hogwarts robes, at 11 years old, and looked at the assembled Wisingamot with the flat, clear, entirely unintimidated attention that was simply his face doing its natural thing. He heard a brief ripple of murmuring from the tiered seats, not hostile yet, but the specific uncertainty of 50 people who had expected something and received something else. The chief warlock, a sharp-eyed elderly witch named Griselda Marchbanks, looked at him from the center of the high bench. "Harry James Potter," she said. "You filed this extraordinary session under Section 42, citing cross-timeline temporal evidence and direct witness testimony regarding deliberate manipulation of a protected individual's timeline and systematic suppression of material information relevant to the governance of the magical community." "Yes," Harry said. "You're the protected individual in question." "Yes." Marchbanks studied him for a moment with the attention of someone who had been doing this for 50 years and was reassessing the standard parameters. "Proceed," she said. Harry began. He had prepared this. Not in the sense of rehearsing a speech, speeches were Alison's domain, performance was Klaus's, formal authority was Luther's. What Harry had prepared was a structure, a shape for the information to move through, built on the same architectural logic Five had taught him for the evidence documentation. Start with what is verifiable. Move through the verified facts in chronological order. Let the facts build their own case without editorializing. The truth, organized clearly, was more devastating than any emotional framing. He started in 1980. The prophecy. Its content, its making, the moment Dumbledore received it and the choice he made in how to use that knowledge. He walked through 1981, the Fidelius charm, the compromised secret keeper, the night his parents died. He was factual. He was specific. He did not perform grief. The grief was present in the room without performance because the facts themselves carried it, and performing it would have made it smaller. He moved through the placement decision. The 1982 diagnostic. The suppression of its results. He presented the documentation in the sequence Five had designed, each piece building on the last, each one reinforcing the evidentiary weight of the whole. When he reached the Horcrux, there was an audible shift in the chamber. Not a gasp, not a collective sound, but a change in the quality of silence. He continued through it, explained what it meant, presented the preserved fragment as physical evidence, described the extraction and Pomfrey's professional findings. He was 11 years old and he was standing in the most significant legal chamber in the wizarding world describing the piece of a Dark Lord's soul that had lived in his own head for a decade, and his voice did not waver, because wavering would have been a performance of distress and the distress was not the point. The point was the decision that had put it there and left it there. The decision made by a man who had loved the people he sacrificed and believed that was sufficient justification. When he finished the factual account, he said, "I have 3 witnesses. Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts, who has direct observational knowledge of multiple events in the documented record. Poppy Pomfrey, Medowitch of Hogwarts, who performed the diagnostic examination and extraction and will speak to the medical evidence. And Hermione Granger, who has independently verified the cross-documentation against primary sources and will speak to the temporal evidence's methodological reliability." He paused. The cross-timeline temporal records were submitted under the temporal evidence provision this morning. They have the Commission's chain of custody certification. He looked at Marchbanks. The custodian is present and available to speak to the methodology. Marchbanks looked at Five, who was seated in the gallery with Diego. Five met her gaze with the flat, professional attention he used for commission appearances and said nothing, because everything that needed saying was in the documentation and Hargreeves had never in his life elaborated beyond what was necessary. "We'll hear the witnesses," Marchbanks said. McGonagall spoke first, and watching her was something Harry would carry for a very long time. She stood in the presenting area with the exact posture and precise diction she brought to everything, and she told the truth. Not all of it, not in the exhaustive chronological way Harry had. She spoke to what she knew personally, what she had witnessed, what she had suspected and been unable to act on. She spoke about Godric's Hollow on the 1st of November, 1981, and the day she spent watching Privet Drive. She spoke about the letter she had written to Dumbledore expressing concern about the Dursleys' suitability. She spoke about 35 years of loyalty to a man she had believed to be the finest person she had ever known. "I did not know the full extent of it," she said, and her voice was perfectly level and her eyes were bright. "I knew something was wrong. I had known since that November. I did not permit myself to examine it fully, because examining it fully would have required me to act on it, and I believed he knew better. I believed that if something was wrong in the design, he would see it and correct it." She paused. "What I understand now, with the benefit of this documentation, is that he knew. He always knew. He didn't fail to see it. He chose it." She looked at the Wizengamot. "I am telling you this not to condemn him wholesale. I have known Albus Dumbledore for 50 years and I know what he has given to this community. But I am telling you this because those years of service do not make the choice acceptable, and my silence about my doubts did not make them less true." Another pause. "I should have spoken sooner. That is my responsibility, and I accept it." The chamber was absolutely still. Hermione spoke next. She was precise and relentless and entirely undaunted by the scale and age of the room around her, because Hermione Granger was undaunted by most things and this was simply the most important test she had been given so far and she intended to pass it with distinction. She moved through the evidentiary methodology with the focus of someone who had spent 3 months verifying it and knew it cold, anticipated every potential challenge to the temporal documentation's reliability, and addressed each one before it was raised. There were 2 members of the Wizengamot who tried to interrupt her with objections about cross-timeline admissibility and she answered both of them with such thorough and immediate precision that the third potential objector visibly decided not to bother. Pomfrey was brief and final. She stated her findings as findings, a medical professional giving a clinical account to a legal body. She described the Horcrux, its integration, its extraction, its characteristics. She stated her professional opinion that its presence had been detectable since 1981 and that any competent diagnostician with access to the appropriate framework would have identified it. She stated that she had seen the 1982 diagnostic record in the documentation package and confirmed that the diagnostic method used would have produced results consistent with Horcrux presence. She said, in her crisp matron's voice, in 30 years of practice, I have never had a patient whose medical information was suppressed for the purpose of maintaining a political plan. I want it noted that I find this to be a profound violation of every ethical standard this community operates under. She sat down. The chamber sat with it. Then the door opened. Dumbledore came in without announcement, without escort, without the habitual magnificent entrance that accompanied his arrivals at Hogwarts. He wore his usual robes but without the usual authority, not deliberately diminished, not performed humility, just a man walking into a room. He was very old, Harry thought, looking at him from the presenting chair. He had always looked old, but now the age was different, less the timeless, deep authority of a great wizard and more the specific age of a person who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has decided to set it down. He looked at Harry first. Harry looked back. Something passed between them that Harry couldn't have named precisely, but which contained, he thought, the essential acknowledgement, I see you, I hear what you've said, I am here, and Harry gave it a small nod that Dumbledore returned with the same economy. Then Dumbledore looked at Marchbanks. I have not been called, he said. But I would like to speak, if the chamber permits it. Marchbanks looked at him for a long moment. She had known him for decades, Harry could see it in the specific quality of her attention, the way she was reading something she had always known was there and was now, finally, receiving its full definition. The chamber permits it, she said. Dumbledore walked to the presenting area. He stood there for a moment before speaking. Not performing the pause, actually needing it, which was visible and therefore more significant than any performance would have been. Everything in the documentation is accurate, he said. His voice was its usual instrument, warm, resonant, carrying the specific weight of a voice that had been trusted by millions of people for decades, but stripped of the architecture of misdirection, of the careful framing, of the 60 years of practiced presentation. Just the voice. Just the truth. Every specific claim in the evidentiary record is correct. I have not come to dispute it. He looked at the Wisengamot. I have come because I was told that the people who trusted me deserve to hear it from me. And that is true. They do. He spoke for 40 minutes. He began at the prophecy, not the circumstances of its making, which were in the documentation, but his internal experience of receiving it. The weight of it. The specific, solitary terror of being the only person who knew what was coming and believing, with the conviction of someone who had seen the war up close, that he was the only person capable of managing it correctly. He spoke about James and Lily Potter with a specificity that was not rhetorical, naming moments, details, the particular quality of their courage and their love and the specific grief of knowing what was coming for them and deciding that the plan required it. He spoke about the night of October 31st, 1981, and what he had felt when he understood that the unthinkable had produced an unexpected result, a one-year-old survivor, and the rapid, terrible calculation he had made in the hours after, sitting alone with the knowledge of the Horcrux and the knowledge of the prophecy and the knowledge that the war was not over. I told myself, he said, that I was the only one who could see the full picture. That others would make the wrong choice if given the information. That the burden of this decision was mine to carry alone, because I was capable of carrying it and others were not. He paused. That is a very comfortable thing to believe. It is comfortable because it transforms what you are doing, using someone, sacrificing them, deciding their fate without their knowledge, into something that looks, from the inside, like service. Like sacrifice of a different kind. Another pause. It is not. I understand that now with a clarity I should have had 30 years ago. What I did was decide that I knew better than Harry Potter what Harry Potter should be willing to give. I made that decision before he could speak. I made it before he could walk. He looked at Harry directly. I made it before he was a person who could make his own decision. And I kept making it, every year, until a 13-year-old removed him from a cupboard in Surrey and gave him everything I had taken. The chamber was absolutely silent. I am not going to ask for understanding, Dumbledore said. I am not going to contextualize this. The people in this room have a right to hear it clearly and to respond to it clearly, and I will not dilute that by explaining myself into sympathy. He folded his hands, those ancient hands, the rings, the weight of decades. I did what the documentation says I did. I believed it was necessary. I was wrong. Not about the necessity of stopping Voldemort, the threat was real, the consequences of failure would have been catastrophic. I was wrong about the method. I was wrong about my right to make that calculation on behalf of a child who had no voice in it. He stopped. He looked at the Wizengamot one more time. I am sorry. For the specific and enormous weight of what that means. He stepped back. He sat down. The chamber breathed. The deliberation took 3 hours. Harry waited with his family in a corridor outside the chamber, Diego, McGonagall, Pomfrey, Hermione, Ron, Arthur Weasley. The corridor was long and stone and had portraits that were pretending not to listen. Vanya's voice existed in the room through the food she'd sent with Diego in a bag, deployed now in the corridor with the particular comfort of things made for you by someone who knew you.